The story begins by introducing Ian Claude, a typical male lead of the angst genre with a traumatic past, but in reality, he is a terrible scumbag who makes anyone regret getting involved with him. The peak of his awfulness is the act of returning the female lead's carefully wrapped birthday gift, ruthlessly trampling on the girl's sincere feelings. Not only that, he also left Diana, who had traveled all the way to his mansion to visit him, waiting for 6 straight hours with the mere excuse of being busy with work. He coldly rejected his childhood friend to accept an arranged marriage, ignoring Diana's immense suffering, an image that makes viewers feel profound pity. It is no wonder that Diana fled to the academy right after his wedding, an act akin to escaping the cruel reality caused by the male lead. Faced with that series of actions, a core question is raised for this mysterious male lead with a dark aura. What on earth is wrong with his personality? Of course, the plot explains that Ian Claude suffered from childhood psychological trauma, so his instinct is always to push others away and live a life denying his emotions. However, in reality, a young girl is holding her phone, reading the comic with an expression of sheer bewilderment as she scrolls to the final page. She cannot believe her eyes when she sees the ending, Diana taking the initiative to approach the crying Ian and gently giving him a kiss of forgiveness. Outraged, the girl throws her phone, screaming in the middle of the street that the author must be crazy to let such a terrible guy be whitewashed and forgiven so easily. Extremely frustrated, she rushes to type a comment, ignoring other fans who are praising the ending, asserting that she needs to speak out this hard truth. Her face tightens, her eyes blazing with anger, determined to fight to the bitter end with the author and the blind fans defending the male lead. Walking and typing simultaneously, she mutters curses, affirming that her frenzy is completely justified in the face of this unreasonable ending. She admits the author has talent and a very engaging writing style, but the problem lies in the fact that this talent has been misplaced.
All that extravagance was poured entirely into building Ian's story, trying to rationalize his wretchedness. Meanwhile, the pitiful female lead, Diana, was neglected, a fact that the readers, the author, and she herself clearly recognized. She left a harsh comment demanding justice for the soft, mochi Diana, sarcastically stating that if the male lead was frozen without emotions, he should go see a doctor instead of using it as a charming trait. Ian's fans immediately rushed in to attack her, calling her a hysterical person, but she ignored them, feeling only disgust for those delusional people. Standing in the middle of a crowded street, she tried to take a deep breath, reassuring herself to calm down and find inner peace. But her anger flared up again when she remembered that the bastard Ian was the root cause of all this frustration. She stormed off, fuming with rage. Suddenly, a blinding light struck, accompanied by an ear-piercing screech of brakes that made her turn around in shock. In that life-and-death moment, as her phone flew out of her hand, a thought flashed through her mind, wishing this was the legendary reincarnation truck. She silently promised that if she could enter the novel, she would smash Ian to pieces. And then that crazy wish actually came true. She woke up on a luxurious bed, her head splitting with pain, vaguely recognizing the unfamiliar surroundings. The room was magnificently decorated in an aristocratic European style, a far cry from her cramped rented room, leaving her bewildered. She sprang up, looking around in a panic, wondering what on earth was happening to her. To verify, she pinched her own cheek, pulled her hair hard, and screamed in pain, confirming that this was no dream. Her trembling hands touched her face as a sense of extreme confusion washed over her. She began to dread the speculation she just had. She wondered if she had really been hit by the legendary truck coon and transmigrated. Recalling the moment her phone shattered, she deduced that if this was indeed a transmigration scenario, she must have definitely fallen into the novel she had just finished reading. Standing in the middle of the magnificent room, she realized the most crucial issue right now wasn't why, but who she had transmigrated into. She rushed to pull back the window curtains to look for a mirror, praying in her heart to please not let her transmigrate into the miserable female lead Diana. As she drew the curtains, she muttered her rejection of that tragic role, preferring to be a passerby rather than the abused female lead.
Looking into the mirror, she breathed a sigh of relief, seeing a black-haired girl, completely different from the description of Diana, but at the same time felt this face was somewhat familiar. She patted her chest in relief, thanking the heavens that her precious Diana was still safe, not possessed by her. But when looking closely at the sharp, beautiful appearance in the mirror, she vaguely realized she was not a nameless background character. Memories flooded back. This is Iloa Alpheus, the second daughter of the Marquise, the person with ash-colored hair and emerald eyes, who had a contract marriage with Ian. She gasped in astonishment upon realizing she had transmigrated into the role of the nominal wife, as dry as her own hair color, a perfect match for the cold Ian. The truth was like lightning striking her ears. She had actually married the man she hated bitterly. She collapsed to the floor, feeling her life was thus over, a dark future waiting ahead. Tears welling up, she wailed miserably in her mind. No matter how many times she thought about it, she still found her life too tragic. She pounded her fists on the floor. Being a roadside stone would be 1,000 times better than the status of being the wife of this trashy male lead. With a face bathed in tears, she looked up at the ceiling and complained. Why, out of so many people, was she chosen for this role? A painful question swirled deep into her soul. Why did she have to reincarnate as the ex-wife of Ian Clouger?
Suddenly, she stopped crying. A glimmer of hope flashed as she looked down at her hands, wondering if the timeline was before her marriage. She scrambled up to look in the mirror, reassuring herself that if she wasn't married yet, she still had a chance to turn the tables and change her fate. But the newly kindled hope was extinguished when she saw the crest of the Ian Cloud family prominently carved on the mirror frame. She gave a wry smile, tears welling up again, accepting the cruel reality that the die was cast. She had truly married him. The image of the bride Iloa at the wedding flashed in her mind like a teasing reminder, confirming that she was indeed someone's wife. Right at that moment, the room door burst open. The maid walked in, saw her mistress kneeling on the floor with a devastated expression, and panicked, asking if she was all right. She hurriedly stood up, denying everything, while the maid blankly swore she hadn't seen anything, even though she had clearly just witnessed a bizarre scene. She tried to regain her composure, took a deep breath to get into character, and told herself that this was the power of reincarnation. She had to behave elegantly. The maid reminded her that it was time for breakfast and she should go downstairs, because it was a habit for the couple to dine together. She vaguely remembered this detail in the novel. It turned out that having breakfast together wasn't out of affection, but because Ian wanted to handle business right at the beginning of the day. The maid adjusted her dress, commenting that the two were truly a couple focused only on efficiency, without a bit of romance. Hearing that she had to go down and meet Ian, she fell heavily onto the bed in frustration, groaning about not wanting to face reality. But then she told herself that since she promised to go down, she had to. She had to scramble up with a heavy heart, feeling as if she were going to a funeral. While getting ready, she recalled the descriptions of Ian's beauty in the novel. Eyes deep as the night sea, high nose, red lips. The author was definitely a diehard fan of his. She frowned in annoyance. No matter how handsome he was, his terrible nature remained unchanged. She was determined not to be deceived by that beauty. Walking down the stairs, she saw Ian sitting there, radiating a blinding aura. She promised herself that no matter how handsome he was, the first thing she would do was spit in his face. The sound of her footsteps echoed, interrupting her violent train of thought and bringing her back to reality in the luxurious dining room. When she saw Ian's face up close, she was stunned, wondering if there was any real human face in the world so incredibly beautiful. She stood frozen, overwhelmed by his flawless beauty, thinking he was CGI graphics rather than a person. Now she understood why the author was so obsessed with him.
Ian looked up, his deep purple eyes looking at her sharply, and asked bluntly what she was doing. He coldly asked how long she planned to stand there, snapping her out of her momentary handsome boy daze and bringing her back to reality. She immediately remembered this guy's nickname was the Tyrant Prince, or the Devil. She forced a smile, but cursed his rudeness inwardly.
Ian ruthlessly told her that if she didn't want to eat, she could just go upstairs. Infuriated, she decided not to starve, decisively pulled out a chair to sit down, and declared that she would eat. She held her fork in frustration, thinking to herself that even though his voice was nice, uttering such unpleasant words only made people more enraged. As the cutlery clanked, Ian suddenly called her wifey, making her pause with a premonition that nothing good was about to happen. He calmly said that her staring at him like that made him feel hurt, but his stone-cold face showed absolutely no emotion, sending a chilling shiver down her spine. The dining table was huge, but the atmosphere between the two was cold and distant, perfectly fitting a loveless marriage. As she ate, she wondered to herself if Iloa and Ian had to go through such heavy, stomach-torturing breakfasts every day. She glanced at Ian, wondering why he was dressed so neatly early in the morning, as if he was going to a party. Normally, he wouldn't be so dressed up unless there was something important. Ian called out wifey once again, interrupting her train of thought, scrutinizing his outfit. He said she looked like she had something to say and told her to just spit it out. She glared at him with daggers in her eyes, secretly cursing this guy for being such an arrogant bastard.
It turned out she was curious because she saw him dressed unusually well, so she asked if he was planning to go somewhere. She could read others very quickly. He said today was the regular meeting day at the royal palace. She let out an ah, remembering the monthly schedule. No wonder he was dressed so formally. Ian's portrait appeared full of power, a grand duke, someone carrying noble royal blood. More specifically, he was the half-brother of the current emperor, an extremely sensitive status in aristocratic circles. Normally, this situation would lead to fratricide fighting for the throne, but strangely, the current emperor had strongly doted on Ian since childhood. Ian revealed an innate talent for swordsmanship from a young age, becoming the youngest swordmaster in history at the age of 18 without needing a teacher, making the emperor admire him even more. The emperor favored him to the extent of bestowing the title of special advisor to the royal knights, granting him supreme military power. She pondered. It seemed the author wanted to favorably pour all the wealth, fame, and power in this world into Ian Clouger's hands. She smacked her lips, thinking that this favor was not just bias, but a disease of the author. She stood up, announcing she would leave immediately. Ian looked at her questioningly, asking shouldn't she say something before leaving. She made the excuse that she was running late. She replied that of course he was late, and he praised her for knowing him so well, making her feel guilty. She paused, wondering if he was being sarcastic, his eyes looking at her full of scrutiny and amusement. When turning her back to leave, Ian reminded her that no matter how delicious the food was, she should wipe her mouth when eating, a stinging embarrassment. She blushed crimson, grinding her teeth, swearing that if he wasn't a swordmaster and she couldn't beat him, she would have turned back and punched him. The scene shifted to introduce Iloa Alpheus, the second daughter of a marquise, belonging to one of the top 10 founding contributor families of the empire. She was dubbed the Belle of High Society, but due to her cold personality, she was often accompanied by the nickname Ice Princess. Her marriage to Ian was entirely for the benefit of the family.
Both families received the emperor's support, and Iola was merely a useful pawn in that political chess game. She thought bitterly. Marrying Ian was the price to pay to expand the family's business, truly a lucrative deal that couldn't be found anywhere else. That was what the original Iola had said, and the Marquis's father had ruthlessly sold his daughter. What a wonderful father-daughter pair. Returning to her room, she sat at the desk, picked up a pen, and seriously began to recalculate the timeline. She determined that this year is the imperial year 273. Ian and Iola got married in March 2 years ago, which means they have been married for exactly 2 years and 2 months. She sighed. The title of newlyweds did not suit this cold couple at all. More importantly, according to the plot, the female lead, Diana, will return in the summer of 274, which means there is only about a year left. She looked at the calendar, finalizing the remaining 1 year to endure this marriage before the main plot began. Iola collapsed on the desk, lamenting about transmigrating exactly at the terrible 2-year marriage milestone. She groaned because she did not want to get entangled with Diana in this strict script, but only wholeheartedly wanted to help the female lead.
After a while of complaining, she calmed herself down and set the goal to end everything smoothly within the next year. According to the plot, just half a year after Diana returned, Ian would realize his true feelings and unilaterally force Iola to divorce to end the marriage. Unfortunately, during that half year of waiting for the divorce papers, the female lead, Diana, would have to endure immense suffering from coldness and returned items. And what gave her the biggest headache was that the root cause of the female lead's pain was blamed entirely on her, the one holding the title of the male lead's wife. She held her head in despair, wondering if she should just log out to be free of debt, seeing herself as nothing but a burden blocking her favorite character's path. She began to plan for a smooth divorce within a year and disappear without a trace before Diana could return. Suddenly her hand stopped. A flash of light appeared as she realized this tragic situation was actually a golden opportunity. Calculating carefully, she saw she had exactly a full year from now until the day Diana officially returned to the capital.
If she made good use of the Grand Duchess's power, she could completely correct every bad habit of Ian during this time. She told herself that even if she couldn't turn her terrible husband into a luxury good, she must at least drag him out of the scrap category. With burning spirit, she was determined to reform the hopeless Ian into a perfect gentleman, a perfect match for Diana before she appeared. She confidently affirmed that she knew the saintly female lead Diana like the back of her hand, and she also knew every detail about the jerk Ian, simply because she had binge-read this novel countless times. She lifted her skirt and walked proudly, secretly telling Diana to wait. She would pave the way, ready to welcome the female lead back. A triumphant laugh rang out. She swore to prove to the whole world that even trash like Ian could be recycled and become useful. The scene transitions to the maid timidly stepping forward upon hearing her mistress's call, signaling an upcoming conversation. Eloa gently asked for the maid's name again to confirm, causing the girl to be slightly surprised, and stammeringly replied that it was Bibi. She secretly blamed the original owner for being too heartless. A maid who had served for 2 whole years, and she couldn't even remember her name? No wonder people found it strange. Eloa smiled and said that she had just heard an interesting story and wanted to verify it with Bibi. She went straight to the point, demanding Bibi to recount in detail the rumors buzzing in the capital regarding her and the Grand Duke. Hearing this, all color drained from Bibi's face, and she stammered in terror, unexpected that her mistress knew and questioned her directly. Eloa retorted, asking if her request was too difficult, forbidden to hear, then reminded her that she disliked having to repeat herself. Not letting Bibi dodge the question, she emphasized that she wanted to hear every detail of the scandals related to herself and her husband. Terrified, Bibi collapsed to the floor, begging her mistress to kill her rather than forcing her to utter such insulting words. Seeing the maid's overreaction, Eloa lowered her voice and promised not to punish her no matter what she said. She added a gentle threat that if Bibi remained silent, she would be disappointed and distance herself, which was even more frightening than punishment. Finally, Bibi tremblingly confessed that people called her mistress an empty shell, or more viciously, the ghost in the Grand Duke's mansion. Upon hearing this, Eloa calmly rested her chin on her hand and casually dropped a sentence. "Is that it?" Completely unfazed and quite different from the fainting reaction typical of noble ladies. Meanwhile, Bibi remained prostrated on the ground, trembling and apologizing as she thought she had committed a grave sin by daring to speak such indecent words. Eloa waved her hand, telling Bibi she had committed no crime since she was the one who ordered it, and then coldly allowed the maid to leave. Eloa smiled and thanked her for being honest, her smile harboring many calculations. The maid breathed a sigh of relief, thanking the heavens that her mistress had generously forgiven her. Left alone, Eloa sat in a daze, bitterly muttering the nickname, the ghost of the Cloudsugger family. Suddenly, she clutched her forehead and sneered, making a blatant declaration. "Ian Cloudsugger, you are dead meat." Her anger began to flare up. Memories rushed back. In her previous life, she was an illustrious keyboard warrior, battling across forums and fearing no fandom. She recalled the internet philosophy of winning by sheer numbers, where the majority always claimed an overwhelming victory. After 10 years of training in the harsh online environment, confronting major fandoms, she had forged a mind of steel. However, this time the opponent was Ian Cloudsugger, a case harder than all the rest.
He was more stubborn than anyone she had ever met. He was obstinate and unreasonably headstrong to a terrifying degree, bearing his emotions deep for 30 years and refusing to overcome his childhood psychological trauma. Iloa worried that the current rumors were targeting her, but if this continued, the spearhead of public opinion would later be aimed at Diana. As a true fan, she was determined not to let that happen, her eyes flashing with resolve. She stood up abruptly, slamming her notepad down on the table with a decisive smack. Burning with the determination to teach her fake husband a lesson he would never forget, she laughed heartily, ready to go to war for Diana. She went straight to Ian's study and knocked on the door. A cold invitation to enter echoed from within. Ian looked up, showing a hint of surprise and annoyance at his wife's sudden appearance. She walked in and slapped the paper onto the desk, her provocative attitude making Ian ask for the reason of her visit. Iloa smiled and said she had matters to discuss, secretly cursing this man in her heart for sleeping little and working too much like Napoleon, which explained his nasty temper.
Ian frowned and repeated their agreement not to bother each other outside of breakfast, unless there was a special matter, his voice full of annoyance. Iloa nonchalantly replied that this was indeed an extremely special matter, inwardly thinking that he was an arrogant jerk. She decisively pushed the paper recording the rumors toward him. Ian picked up the paper and read it, realizing the ugly names and nicknames people had given him. Iloa laughed inwardly when she saw him indifferently ask, "So what?" Just as she had predicted, this guy was a bastard. He coldly asked her in return if he was supposed to care about her reputation as well, a callously hurtful remark. Iloa was so angry that her veins popped out, but she maintained her smile, silently cursing his indifferent attitude when his wife was being bad-mouthed by everyone. She questioned him that these rumors were related to him too, and that it was the shared responsibility of the Grand Duke. He looked at her in silence, and Iloa challenged him to try and shirk his responsibility. She asked once more, to confirm whether he truly had no reason to care.
Ian sighed, closing his eyes wearily, and told her to get straight to the point about what she wanted. Iloa laughed sarcastically, bitterly realizing that the wife was being gossiped about because of the husband, yet the husband had not a single word of apology or comfort. She reassured herself to stay calm, taking a deep breath so as not to rush in and punch him immediately. She boldly declared that no matter how beneficial this marriage was, she could no longer continue living in a state of being looked down upon like this. Ian looked at her, speculating that it seemed she had another solution in mind. He immediately cut her off, warning that if she planned to act out a cheesy scene demanding his heart or love, she should stop right away, making Iloa feel nauseous. She immediately denied it with a disgusted expression, telling him not to make such jokes, as it gave her goosebumps. Ian was dumbfounded, and seeing him confused for the first time, asked back, "Then what is it?" Iloa slammed her hand on the table again, condescendingly calling out the Grand Duke to draw attention to her upcoming declaration. She leaned her face close to his, asking if he had ever heard the saying that rivers and mountains are easy to change, but human nature is hard to alter. Then she bluntly declared she did not believe in that saying, her challenging gaze leaving him bewildered. With a close-up of Iloa's determined eyes, she asked what he thought about that viewpoint. She leaned close to his ear and whispered her declaration of war. "I am saying that I will change you from now on." The scene of the two facing each other was tense, with Iloa holding the upper hand and completely overpowering Ian. Ian was so shocked that his jaw dropped, and he asked back, "Change me? What did you say?" Iloa confirmed that he had not misheard. She genuinely intended to do the unthinkable, leaving him in absolute panic. She continued to attack, stating that he was in a hopeless condition, turning her from a beauty queen into a ghost in just 2 years. Ian completely froze upon hearing the phrase "hopeless condition" from his wife's mouth, a true culture shock. Iloa sneered, adding that she didn't expect much from him as a person anyway. She said all she wanted was to keep the last bit of dignity of a Grand Duchess. She reassured him not to worry, she would only polish and reform him, and then cleanly disappear to pave the way for Diana. She bitterly recalled the nicknames empty shell, ghost, and furniture that people called her.
She said she had endured for so long out of respect for the emperor and her father, but could not bear it any longer. Ian sat silently listening, with a thoughtful expression on his face, beginning to intend to confess something.
Iloa emphasized that this was not just her own problem, but a matter of both of their honors. She reminded him that no matter how much royal blood he had, or how favored he was by the emperor, honor was still important. Ian remained arrogant, assuming that a few rumors about their marriage could not tarnish his honor. Iloa stated that she was human too, and hearing those words hurt her as well. Pointing at him, she said that even if he closed his eyes and covered his ears, the gossip would still reach him. She issued a clear ultimatum: 1 year. The time limit for this reform was exactly 1 year, after which she would not bother him anymore. She added that if their reputation remained unchanged after a year, she would give up and handle everything herself. When he questioned this, she replied bluntly that it meant she would live quietly like a dead person. Then she pulled out another piece of paper, adding, "Or I could just get a divorce." Stunned, Ian repeated the word divorce. Iloa explained that he only needed someone to fill the position of his wife anyway. She said if he had many other options, she was willing to step aside, as long as the new person was capable enough. She hinted that after their separation, he could find someone more suitable for him, namely Diana. The imaginary picture of beautiful Diana in a wedding dress appeared in her mind.
She concluded the matter, stating that she didn't want to live her whole life with that humiliating label, and hoped he would cooperate. Ian looked at the form on the table, fingering the edge of the paper, realizing that although it sounded like a declaration of war, he entirely had nothing to lose in this deal. He asked if Iloa had any specific plans for the coming year, with a serious attitude like a teacher checking the homework of a problematic student. She declared that she would make the plans herself from now on, but first she wanted to propose 2 important conditions to finalize the agreement between them. The first request was that Ian must treat her properly as a wife, at least in public. The second request was to set aside a certain amount of time each week to meet, considering it a mental training course. Upon hearing this, Ian frowned in confusion and retorted, asking what was the use of spending time with her. Wouldn't people naturally change if left alone? Iloa immediately replied that of course not. To become a decent person, one needs proper education. She secretly calculated in her mind, determined to reform the distorted mindset of this precious husband through drastic educational measures before the female lead, Diana, appeared. Iloa bluntly criticized Ian's current version as a hopeless case, so he should just treat these mandatory meetings as attending a cultural remedial class. Seeing that Ian seemed about to object with an annoyed expression, she immediately cut him off, asking if her serious demeanor right now looked like she had too much free time and was joking around at this hour. Eventually, Ian compromised on exactly a 1-year time frame. He figured that whether his reputation changed or not, everything would return to the old order after a year anyway. Iloa smiled brightly and agreed to seal the deal, but inwardly she was rejoicing because she was absolutely certain she would successfully divorce him without a hitch after this, exactly as she wished. She pulled out the schedule to examine it, finding the weekends and evenings reasonable, while Ian looked at the paper with skeptical eyes, as if she were arranging an important shareholder meeting. She smacked her lips, complaining that the weekend was a bit short, demanding to occupy both days off, but still acted democratic by saying if he was busy with other things, he could just give a 3-day notice so she could adjust. Ian complained that doing so was a waste of time, so Iloa immediately threatened back that if he didn't like it, she would sit and recite the list of false rumors about him one by one for him to listen to until he was bored. Caught by his weak point, Ian had to back down and bargain for just 1 weekend day. Iloa looked at him and chuckled inwardly, thinking that this guy was just acting tough, but was actually quite easy to manipulate. She finalized the deal quickly, making an appointment to meet him on the weekend with a triumphant smile, because in reality, her initial goal was only 1 day anyway, truly the peak art of negotiation, asking for 10 to get 5. Before leaving, she didn't forget to leave behind the sticky note of rumors as a mental gift, telling him to take it out and read it for entertainment whenever he was bored, to deeply reflect on life. The next morning, the maid Bibi knocked on the door and entered, starting a new day at the mansion with a bright smile on her lips. Bibi warmly asked about her sleep and intended to help her get ready to go down for breakfast as usual, but Iloa coldly declared that she would skip breakfast today, so there was no need to prepare anything. Upon hearing this, Bibi froze and asked a silly question, unable to believe her ears at her master's sudden breaking of the routine.
Iloa ordered the butler to be called and a carriage prepared for her to go out immediately,
making Bibi flustered and asking if they really had to leave right now because it was so rushed. Receiving the order, Bibi instantly changed her attitude, strictly following her mistress's immediate instructions with a determined look on her face. While the maid ran around to make arrangements, Iloa thought to herself that even though yesterday's negotiation was a great success, she had realized a new truth for this married life. That is, there was no need for her to torture herself by having breakfast with Ian every day. Since they both didn't like each other, there was no reason to force themselves to look at each other and make the food hard to swallow.
Bibi returned and knocked on the door, asking for permission to enter. Iloa happily agreed, feeling much more relaxed after shedding the burden of facing her fake husband. Bibi brought along a formidable team of maids, proudly declaring that since the madam was going out to town today, they would dress her up more gorgeously than usual to show off. Bibi scrutinized her master's hair, wondering whether she should wear it up elegantly or let it down gently to be fashionable today. As for footwear, Bibi advised choosing low-heeled loafers to make it easy to walk on the main street, skillfully flattering her master by saying that since she was already tall, wearing flat shoes would still make her look radiantly beautiful. Iloa saw that Bibi was even more excited than she was. She sweat-dropped, thinking to herself that she only intended to wear simple clothes for a walk, so how did it turn into this grand fashion feast? Just then, there was a knock on the door. Butler Harold came to report that everything was ready, interrupting Bibi's enthusiastic consultation. The old butler entered the room with a neat demeanor, respectfully waiting for the mistress's orders. Harold remarked that it had been a long time since he saw the madam interested in taking a walk on the main street, and Iloa also smiled, acknowledging this positive change in herself. She whispered into the butler's ear, demanding that he immediately prepare 2 blank checks for her, a request reeking of money and power. Harold startled, stammering to ask again if she meant blank checks. Iloa calmly retorted, asking why he was so surprised, as if she didn't have the right to use this house's money. The butler hastily denied it, promising to prepare them right away out of fear of offending her, and then timidly asked about the breakfast that had already been served waiting for her to come down. Iloa coldly said she had no interest, telling him to just report it to the Grand Duke like that. She wondered what disease this house had, that they had to eat breakfast together to survive. She left a resentful message, saying to just let him eat alone to see if he found it appetizing. The scene shifts to Ian sitting lonely in the middle of a large dining table. The butler tremblingly reported that the madam said she would not be having breakfast today, and the atmosphere in the room sank into a cold chill. Ian waved his hand for the butler to leave. His face was cold, but his heart was definitely turbulent due to this unusual absence. He looked at the luxurious plate of food in front of him, wondering what the hell was going on with his wife, who had always adhered to the rule of silence. The image of Iloa declaring that she would change him flashed in his mind. Ian smirked, thinking to himself that she really did what she said, starting with starving him mentally. He ate while feeling grumpy, thinking about how yesterday she aggressively stormed into the room to make a scene, and today she completely disappeared. What an incomprehensible and capricious woman. He recalled her radiantly provocative smile when she suggested a divorce if he wanted one, a haunting smile that made the meat in his mouth tasteless like chewing straw. Ian stopped his hands, putting the cutlery down on the table with a clack, unable to swallow his breakfast when being publicly stood up like this. He clicked his tongue, admitting the rising annoyance, feeling his mind disturbed for the first time by the normally faded nominal wife. The scene shifts to a clear blue sky, absolutely beautiful weather, completely contrasting with the gloomy, irritable mood of someone sitting at home.
Bibi was still full of questions, asking repeatedly if her mistress really wanted to go to that tailor shop. Iloa only cared about whether they had brought enough working tools. Bibi held up the briefcase, confirming that she had brought enough blank books and necessary documents. Iloa praised the maid for doing a good job with a satisfied look, nodded in agreement with that change. Iloa smiled mysteriously, thinking to herself that the reason she woke up early to go to the shop was not for clothes, but for a much nobler purpose waiting ahead. That was to clear the way for the smooth journey of the female lead Diana, a true fangirl trying her best for the future of her idol. She told herself that since she decided to live in this world, she couldn't just stay holed up in the mansion forever. She had to rush into battle to change the plot. The girl struck an energetic pose, shouting the starting slogan for love, "My goddess," with a burning spirit as if going to war. The ultimate goal is the happiness of her beloved Diana, whose image as a beautiful pink-haired female lead appeared like a saint, illuminating her soul.
The first mission she set for herself in this campaign was to grasp the trend flow of the capital. She thoroughly applied the philosophy of knowing oneself and knowing the enemy guarantees 100 victories as she strode down the street with full confidence and aura. In this era, clothing stores were not only places to sell clothes, but also information hubs, gathering spots for the upper class, and the origin of all rumors. She compared the aristocratic social circle to be as fierce as a bloody battlefield, the only difference being that they used tongues and outfits instead of swords and spears. Bibi hesitantly called her mistress, subtly reminding her that she had just walked right past a large shop without even glancing at it. Iloa feigned ignorance, asking back, then nonchalantly continued into the deserted alley, ignoring Bibi, who was in utter panic, thinking they were going the wrong way. She ordered Bibi to just keep quiet and follow, as her true destination had been locked in from the very beginning, leaving no room for argument. The two stopped in front of an old building in the alley. Iloa muttered, confirming the location in her memory to see if it was correct. She cheered, "Ah, found it," when she saw the old painted wooden door, which did not look like a high-end fashion boutique at all. Bibi tremblingly asked again if she really wanted to enter this shabby place, and Iloa challengingly asked back why not. Bibi tried to persuade her mistress to go to the Veronica boutique on the main street, the largest and most luxurious place in the capital, but Iloa flatly dismissed it. She coldly reminded Bibi that she did not ask for any consulting advice, exuding an oppressive aura that forced others to submit to her commands. Bibi fearfully complied, not daring to utter another word in the face of her mistress's resolute and cold attitude. Iloa placed her hand on the door, thinking to herself that even though this shop was on the verge of bankruptcy, it was the only store she needed to enter right now. She gripped the doorknob tightly, firmly asserting that this was no ordinary clothing store, but a gold mine in the future. The door opened, and a blue-haired woman called out to see who had arrived. Bibi immediately recognized her as Madame Z, the shop owner. Madame Z was also terrified when she realized that the uninvited guest was the noble Grand Duchess, someone who supposedly would never set foot in here. She hurriedly bowed deeply in greeting. Iloa calmly announced that she had come to look at dresses like a normal customer. The shop owner was dumbfounded, stammering a question because she couldn't understand why a noble lady would crawl into this damp, hidden corner to buy clothes. Iloa smiled as bright as a flower, urging her to quickly bring out the clothes for her to see, telling her not to stand there frozen like a statue anymore. Madame Z snapped back to reality, profusely saying yes, and ran to get the goods, her face still showing shock at this ironic situation. A moment later, she pushed out a clothing rack, which looked quite modest and sparse compared to the luxurious needs of the nobility. She hesitantly confessed that these were all the dress models the shop currently had, as their tight budget prevented them from tailoring more. Iloa glanced over, silently evaluating that these designs were truly ahead of their time. Indeed, her eyes were not wrong when she chose this place.
According to the storyline, in just half a year, thanks to the unintentional promotion by a princess, Madame Z's shop will take off like a kite in the wind and become famous. And a year later, Madame Z will become the capable right-hand woman, strongly supporting Diana when she returns to the capital. Diana will study shoe design at the academy, and Madame Z will be the female lead's business partner and biggest supporter in her career. In the original story, Diana had a hard time winning over the difficult Madame Z, so Iloa planned to get close to her first to lessen the burden on her idol. Furthermore, this is also a wonderful opportunity for her to build her own information network, a perfect two birds with one stone deal. Seeing Iloa staying silent for too long, Madame Z started to worry, fearing that her designs did not please the picky VIP guest. She hurriedly explained that she would redesign new ones if she didn't like them, begging for just one chance. But Iloa smiled and interrupted her. She declared bluntly, "I will buy all the clothes in this shop, including accessories." An epic, all-inclusive closing deal. Both Madame Z and Bibi gasped in astonishment, their eyes wide and mouths agape, unable to believe their ears at Iloa's willingness to spend. Madame Z stammered to ask again to make sure she hadn't misheard, and Iloa nodded in confirmation without any hesitation. The shop owner was wide-eyed, still unable to digest this earth-shattering information, feeling like she had hit the jackpot. She cautiously asked the reason why she bought everything, and Iloa casually replied that nobles don't need a reason to buy things. If they like it, they just go for it. Why ask so much? Madame Z let out a sigh, her limbs trembling with emotion and dizziness from the windfall that fell from the sky. She asked again with a professional demeanor if she wanted to modify any designs to make them more suitable. In the original story,
Madame Z was very arrogant and stubborn with her designs, and it was this conservatism that almost caused her shop to go bankrupt in the early days.
The fact that she proactively offered to alter the design proved just how sluggish the shop's business was and how severe their financial difficulties had become. Iloa said there was no need to change the design, just adjusting it to fit her measurements would be enough, making Madame Rhett surprised once again at this easygoing attitude. She turned and called Bibi to bring out the tools. The maid hurried to follow the order, still in a state of shock. The briefcase opened, revealing a blank checkbook and a seal already prepared for this investment deal. Iloa held the blank check, told Madame Rhett to write down the full price on it and send it to the Grand Duke's estate for payment, while declaring that she would sponsor the shop from now on. A powerful declaration that officially made Madame Rhett her person under the name of being sponsored by the Grand Duchess. She added an instruction to send the altered clothes to the mansion within a week, and Madame Rhett bowed in strict obedience with infinite gratitude. Iloa smiled brightly, reminding the shop owner to take accurate measurements because she would continue to visit and support them for a long time, ending a shopping trip full of calculation and victory. Madame Rhett took a deep breath to regain her composure, clenched her fists, and bowed down, loudly pledging to serve her master with all her might, while Iloa looked at the maid calmly. Without wasting another second, Madame Rhett immediately started her professional work, picking up the tape measure to take the master's measurements, and Iloa also happily stood still to cooperate. While measuring, Madame Rhett constantly praised the master for her slender arms and straight shoulders, firmly asserting that this masterpiece of a figure would look absolutely gorgeous in an off-the-shoulder dress. Reaching the waist, Madame Rhett exclaimed in astonishment because it was so slender, then blurted out a weird question asking if the master was a spine beauty, leaving Iloa bewildered and not understanding anything.
Iloa's eyes widened, sweating profusely, because she couldn't digest the bizarre backbone concept her maid had just invented. Seeing Madame Z chattering incessantly about body measurements, Iloa started getting a headache, thinking to herself that the woman should hold her tongue, and finally had to interrupt to end the noisy measuring session. Madame Z excitedly promised to deliver a perfectly fitting dress, noticing the young mistress's eyes sparkling. But in reality, Iloa was appreciating the truth that money could buy anything in this world. Once finished, Iloa said goodbye to leave, and Madame Z bowed deeply to see the guest off with great respect. But as soon as the young mistress's figure disappeared, the shop owner complained to the heavens about her aching waist after a stressful working session. Iloa walked happily like a bird, proud of having won over the picky shop owner Madame Z. She calculated that she would use her as eyes and ears, and later as a bridge to help the female lead Diana when she returned. Seeing the beautiful weather, Iloa invited Bibi to take a walk around the neighborhood before returning to the mansion to enjoy the fresh air, and the maid immediately nodded repeatedly in response to this great idea. Returning to a room after a long trip, sleepiness rushed in. Iloa covered her mouth and let out a long, tired yawn, wanting to climb into bed immediately. She wondered if she had dawdled at the bookstore a bit too long, recalling the massive loot of books she had just brought back, feeling that time had passed really fast. Just as she was about to sneak back to her bedroom early and leave Bibi to clean up the pile of things, she suddenly stopped when she saw Ian's figure looming at the bottom of the stairs in the hall. Their eyes met in the vast space. Iloa was slightly flustered, while Ian stared at her with an unpredictable expression. She decided to ignore him, pretending not to see him, and walked quickly up the stairs to avoid an unwanted encounter at this hour. She told herself that their relationship wasn't close enough to require a polite greeting, so she just brushed past him like a cold wind, leaving Ian standing there in silence. Unexpectedly, Ian spoke up and asked if she had just returned, making Iloa startle and stop, her eyes wide as she turned back to look, not expecting this block of ice to initiate a conversation. She vaguely explained that she had also just gone out for a bit, and then he commented that it was quite late, an incredibly clumsy way to start a conversation.
Looking at the pendulum clock pointing past midnight, Iloa finally realized why her eyes were drooping. She nodded in agreement with his obvious remark. Ian clenched his fists in suppressed frustration, assuming she must have been very busy with work to skip breakfast and disappear until late at night before showing her face. Iloa let out an ah in her mind, remembering how she ditched breakfast this morning, secretly laughing bitterly as she realized this husband of hers seemed to hold on to that grudge longer than she thought. She calmly admitted she was indeed busy,
while scrutinizing Ian's ugly, frowning face, looking as if he were swallowing bitter melon because his wife abandoned him. Unable to hold back any longer, Ian grumpily brought up the old agreement she herself had set to only meet during breakfast, and now breaking the rule was no different from mocking him. He muttered in reproach, wondering what the hell she was doing staying out until this hour, making Iloa surprised by this overly concerned attitude and subtly jealous tone. Then he turned to lecture her that no matter what scheme she was plotting, she must remember she is the Duchess and please maintain her duties and image as she always had. He used the excuse that breakfast was the only time to discuss household affairs to force her to join, but before he could finish his sentence, Iloa ruthlessly poured a bucket of cold water. "I don't like to."
Ian was completely stunned, his face looking as confused as a goose, stammering to ask what she meant because he couldn't believe his ears at that blunt and bold rejection. Iloa asked back why she had to do that when the Grand Duke here seemed to not care the slightest bit about this wife. She exposed the truth that his indifference had ruined her reputation, so why should she shoulder that damn responsibility and promise all by herself? While exposing him, she reminded him that while he neglected his wife, she had been working her fingers to the bone, fulfilling the duties of a duchess all this time, making Ian feel guilty. She turned away proudly under the moonlight, dropping a bitter remark that it seemed in this game of cards, she was the only one on the losing end. She blatantly declared that she would pay him back fairly. However he treated her, she would return the favor exactly, and seeing him lonely in the morning made her even more delighted. She silently messaged with a smirk that whether she would be an angel or a devil depended on his attitude, treating him like a child who needed to be taught from scratch. She smiled brightly, concluding her extremely simple philosophy of give and take, then slammed the door shut, leaving him rooted to the spot in complete shock. Ian stood there frozen, his usually cold face now showing extreme bewilderment, speechless at his wife's dizzying change. Being snapped back at so fiercely by her, Ian could only weakly tell her to go inside the room. Iloa turned back and asked sarcastically, "Oh really?" She challenged him to object freely if he was dissatisfied, then wiggled her hips and walked away, not bothering to look back at her husband's helpless expression. As she walked, she inwardly cursed that hateful Ian to trip and break his nose, feeling extremely gloating after her victorious verbal battle. Night fell over the mansion, the cold moonlight illuminating the quiet scenery, a stark contrast to the fiery battle that had just taken place inside. Back in her room, Iloa sat reading reference books, but yawned repeatedly, realizing that the theories in the books were too far-fetched, and applying them to that block of wood husband was truly hopeless. Looking at the cheesy romance book titled The Symphony of Love, she closed it in frustration, concluding that educating Ian's emotions couldn't be done mechanically like this. She reaffirmed her noble mission, to turn that cold-blooded bastard into someone with a warm heart before the female lead returned, even though this task was harder than ascending to heaven. She patted her cheeks to reassure herself that she had to overcome this difficulty and must not be discouraged by the impossible case named Ian Clouger. Looking out the window and feeling too suffocated, she decided to go down to the garden for a walk to catch some fresh air and clear her mind before sleeping.
Stepping down into the night garden, she exclaimed in delight. It turned out that the feeling of strolling in the quiet of the night in an aristocratic mansion was so interesting and romantic. She told herself that since she would have to yield this grand estate to Diana later anyway, she should take advantage of it and enjoy as much as she could now. While happily admiring the flowers and the moon, she suddenly stopped in surprise when she discovered something interesting in the garden. She smiled, appreciating the beauty of the rose bushes blooming under the moonlight. It was truly a magnificent scenery that could only be found in a duke's mansion. Looking at the meticulously cared-for flower beds, she nodded in acknowledgement of the class of this place. Everything was perfect and impeccable. Suddenly, her nose tickled, and a familiar feeling rushed in, signaling that something unfortunate was about to happen amidst the romantic setting. She let out a loud sneeze, shattering the quiet and elegant atmosphere, causing her noble image to completely vanish. She raised her hand to sniffle, realizing that the night dew was quite cold, and this young lady's health would not allow her to stroll any longer. She decided to turn back to her room to keep warm, her eyes absently glancing up at the upper balcony before leaving. From above, Ian was standing with his arms crossed by the window, quietly observing the small figure of his wife in the garden with thoughtful eyes.
Seeing her rub her eyes and sniffle after sneezing, he frowned, making a disastrous misunderstanding that she was standing alone crying out of self-pity, and an indescribable sense of guilt arose in his heart. The assistant returned to announce his arrival. The red-handed Kai was struggling to carry a towering stack of documents, looking quite pitiful. Ian casually remarked that he was late, which made Kai furious. He argued back that he was just in the West 10 minutes ago, and making it back here was already miraculously fast. Kai complained nonstop about how incredibly exhausting it was to use long-distance magic circles, realizing that being a subordinate to a big boss was no fun at all. Not stopping there, Kai put down the stack of papers and sarcastically asked if he was planning to finish all this work, which was due next week, tonight.
Ian calmly admitted it as if it were obvious, making Kai just hold his head and complain to the heavens, not understanding why his life was so unlucky to serve this workaholic. Suddenly, Ian stopped writing and called Kai's name with an unusually serious tone, startling the assistant. Ian turned to ask a blatant question. "Do you think I am being too much?" Hearing this, Kai's face looked like, "Is that even a question?" Taking advantage of the situation, Kai unleashed a long tirade, blaming his boss for exploiting his labor, causing him severe sleep deprivation. If anything happened to him, who would take responsibility for the LJJ family? But Ian nonchalantly corrected him, stating he was asking about his wife. Kai froze completely, his face full of question marks, not understanding why his 1,000-year ice block boss suddenly mentioned the Grand Duchess. Too shocked to think straight, Kai rushed over to touch Ian's forehead, asking if he had a terminal illness or a high fever that made him talk nonsense, which made Ian snap and tell him to shut up. Kai was still in a daze, muttering that this was the first time he had ever heard him mention his wife, doubting Ian's health was truly okay. Ian pondered and recalled his marriage, admitting it was an alliance of convenience between two strangers, and she was just like a lodger in this very house. However, that faint wife now dared to skip breakfast without saying a word, and even brought up divorce. The image of Eloa smiling brightly and turning away appeared in Ian's mind, haunting him endlessly. Kai's jaw dropped when Ian confirmed that the words divorce came out of the madam's own mouth, a real shock for both of them. Regaining his composure, Kai timidly asked if he had comforted his wife at all after hearing that shocking news. Ian naively asked back why he should do that, leaving Kai to heave a long sigh, completely helpless against his boss's negative infinity EQ. Kai indignantly scolded Ian for not acting human, affirming that if the madam cried, it was entirely his fault. While Ian stubbornly argued it was unreasonable, Kai began his lecture, questioning why the newlyweds slept in separate rooms, and bet that the two hadn't even exchanged more than 10 sentences, sending a barrage of complaints flying around.
Struck a nerve, Ian irritably told Kai to shut up, but Kai was fiercely demanding his rights, telling Ian to care for his employees like that. Kai delivered the deciding blow, asking if Ian knew what day his wife's birthday was, causing Ian's hand to stop, ink dripping onto the paper. A heavy silence replaced the answer, and Kai looked at Ian with a judgmental "I knew it" glare, his face full of disdain. Kai reminded him that September 23rd is the madam's birthday, coinciding with such a big autumn festival, and yet he didn't remember, which was truly helpless. Ian tried to salvage the situation by saying this is a political marriage, so there's no need to pay attention to minor details. But Kai ruthlessly concluded that things getting to this point was entirely Ian's fault. Ian recalled Eloa's words, that she was ready to divorce and make room for someone more suitable. Those words kept echoing in his head. He muttered the word divorce again with a dazed expression, looking as if he was starting to genuinely panic. Hearing this, Kai immediately screamed, "What? Divorce?" slamming the table with a bang that made the furniture shake. Ian told Kai not to overreact, but Kai couldn't calm down, knowing that the gentle, patient madam had to utter that word. Ian tried to justify that it was just a hypothesis, but Kai yelled that the madam cried when talking about it, asking if Ian was even human for not noticing anything. Kai suddenly remembered some breaking intelligence, reporting that today the madam went on a shopping spree at a fashion boutique and bought a bunch of romance novels. Kai vigorously shook Ian's shoulders, repeatedly asking if he felt the crisis, while Ian dazedly asked back, "What crisis?" Kai emphasized the unusual changes, buying new clothes and reading romance novels. The assistant asked if Ian understood what those signs meant, while the image of a beautiful, mysterious Eloa appeared. Kai deduced that the madam was having a change of heart,
possibly even having another man in her dreams, making Ian jolt in shock. The phrase "another man" struck Ian like lightning. He imagined the scene of his wife standing next to some strange guy. Kai grandly declared that if Ian got divorced, he would also resign immediately, because he couldn't stand it anymore. Ian coldly reminded him that this quarter's salary hadn't been paid yet, causing Kai, who was burning with fighting spirit, to suddenly pale.
Ian delivered the final blow, saying that if he wanted to quit, he should pack his things and leave right now. Kai immediately did a 180-degree turn, swearing eternal loyalty to capitalism. Seeing that Kai was too noisy, Ian kicked him right out. The assistant said yes profusely and quickly slipped away. Left alone, Ian recalled Aloa's words that she had endured enough for her family's honor and could not continue anymore. He stared at the pen in his hand, his mind too messed up to focus on work anymore. Finally, he dropped the pen and sighed, muttering how annoying it was, acknowledging the mixed emotions invading him. Morning came, and the morning sunlight shone into the magnificent room, signaling the start of a new day. Aloa was still sleeping soundly on the soft bed, in the most comfortable sleeping posture possible. She sprang up and stretched refreshingly, cheering because she had a good dreamless sleep, making her spirits high. Looking at the clock and seeing it was past breakfast time, she clicked her tongue, thinking that since she was already late anyway, she might as well take her time getting ready. As the clock ticked away, Aloa leisurely did her personal hygiene routine without rushing at all. She pulled the bell rope to call the servants, assuming that Ian must have gone to work by now, so she was free. The servants came in to help her change clothes, and Aloa gleefully thought of the prospect of eating breakfast alone in peace. She walked unhurriedly down the hallway, wearing a beautiful new dress, her mood as joyful as a bird freed from its cage. While walking, she hummed and calculated where she should go out to play today, enjoying her free life. But her smile vanished when she stepped into the dining room and saw an unwanted sight.
Ian was still sitting there reading the newspaper, which shocked Aloa heavily, wondering why this burden hadn't disappeared yet. She stammered, asking why he was still here, while an image of Chibi Ian popped up in her head, warning of an indigestion risk. Ian coldly asked back if there was a problem, an attitude that made Aloa furious, just wanting to grab a fork and stab him once. Thinking again, she realized the knife seemed more powerful, so she glared at the knife on the table with bullet-like eyes. But remembering that he was a great swordmaster and she couldn't beat him, she swallowed her anger, sat down, and growled, asking again for the purpose of him sitting there. Ian nonchalantly replied that he was having a meal, even though he was holding a newspaper. Aloa was thoroughly disappointed because she had accidentally hoped he stayed to apologize for last night. She shook her head in boredom, telling herself she couldn't demand a heartless person become decent overnight, when suddenly Ian called out. Ian put down the newspaper, his face serious, and said that he had thought about the training she mentioned. Aloa smiled brightly, but in her heart she was making wild guesses about what excuse he would use to refuse, the palace or meetings. She gripped the fork tightly, secretly swearing that whatever the reason, she absolutely wouldn't let him back out. Unexpectedly, Ian finalized the deal instantly, deciding on the whole weekend, making Aloa, who was about to refuse on his behalf, tongue-tied. The girl stared blankly, unable to believe her ears, her head full of question marks flying around. She asked again to be sure if it was for both days, and Ian calmly reminded her that it was the condition she had set herself. Aloa was completely bewildered, wondering if this guy hid his head somewhere to change his nature so quickly. Seeing her hesitate, Ian was about to take back his words, but Aloa hastily waved her hands to deny it, not wanting to be foolish enough to miss the opportunity. Ian nodded to seal the deal, then stood up, his demeanor decisive as he prepared to leave. Aloa scrutinized his military uniform, guessing he had to go to the palace, yet he was willing to wait all morning just to deliver this news. Ian turned around and called out to her once more. She answered absent-mindedly, her heart pounding, not knowing what trick he was going to pull next. Ian turned back, his face slightly embarrassed, and said to try that effort out. Aloa froze for a second time, her mouth stuttering, unable to speak in the face of the unexpectedly cheesy remark. Ian added, "That give-and-take thing you mentioned, let's try it," affirming his goodwill to cooperate.
After saying that, he turned and walked straight away, leaving Aloa sitting there stunned alone. She looked at her husband's back, her face full of confusion and doubting her view of life. Then the weekend arrived as fast as the wind, bringing along much nervousness and anxiety. During that time, Aloa had binge-read a pile of romance novels and taken walks every night to seek a brilliant idea. Finally, she concluded that facing it head-on was the best approach, setting up a tea party and waiting for her husband to enter the battlefield. Ian appeared, complaining with an unenthusiastic expression about whether she was taking up his entire day off just to drink tea. Aloa calmly took a sip of tea, ignoring his grumbling with an elegant demeanor. She smiled brightly and explained that for the first session they should just have a gentle chat to get acquainted, treating it as a warm-up. But inside, she was screaming because Ian's scrutinizing gaze was staring holes into her face.
She stated her reason that changing habits takes time, and most importantly, she needed to clearly understand the student's level first. Ian repeated the words "understand the level," while Eloa secretly evaluated in her head that this guy's level was a big fat 0. She recalled the plot. This guy was so clueless about communication that when Diana went away to study, fans had to pity the female lead because he completely ignored her. The memory of Ian coldly drawing a clear boundary with his childhood friend before she left resurfaced, making Eloa's blood boil. She angrily thought to herself that there was no way this guy could understand a girl's feelings, truly acting like a block of wood and stone. Returning to reality, she gently suggested taking the time to get to know each other since they were still too unfamiliar, and Ian reluctantly agreed. Eloa confidently declared that in a year, "You will have to thank me for this, Grand Duke." Ian raised his eyebrow and retorted, saying she spoke as if she could foresee the future. Eloa broke into a cold sweat, awkwardly laughing it off by saying she was just guessing roughly, narrowly avoiding exposure. Ian sighed, blushing as he agreed to try conversing, showing a bit of commendable effort. Eloa started the beginner's lesson, exchanging simple daily greetings. Ian questioned that they had already met this morning, but Eloa immediately corrected him, saying that meeting is one thing, but greeting properly is another. She explained that people living in the same house must ask each other if they slept well or how the weather is. Even the servants know how to do that.
Ian used his military genius's logical thinking to argue that seeing her face was enough to know she slept well, and seeing the outdoor tea table was enough to know the weather was nice, so there was no need to ask. Eloa was so furious she wanted to snap the flower branch in her hand, thinking to herself that if he wasn't a swordmaster, he would have been punched. Suppressing her anger, she explained that greetings are meant to build an emotional connection, not to exchange information, and that he had never done so with her. Holding the teacup in his hand, Ian coldly dropped the phrase, "It's useless," extinguishing any newly sparked communication effort and making the atmosphere instantly drop. Eloa picked up the paper recording his false rumors, threatening that if he refused to cooperate, she would sit down and read his list of scandals right now. Faced with his wife's stubbornness, Ian could only sigh a weary "ha," accepting defeat against this mental threat. He began practicing the greeting lesson mechanically, like reciting a textbook, asking if she slept well, and commenting that the weather was beautiful, which made Eloa secretly think he was just repeating exactly what she had just said. Better than nothing anyway. Eloa smiled and replied, following the proper social etiquette, that she slept well, and both the weather and the flowers today were very beautiful. She took the opportunity to lecture him, saying that even though he sees flowers every day, his feelings each day could be different, and then asked if he felt any flutter in his heart at this beauty. Ian turned his face to look at the colorful garden, then ruthlessly gave a blunt 2-word answer, "I don't," ending any newly budding romance. Eloa was so mad that blue veins popped on her forehead, but she still tried to maintain a twisted smile, asking again, "Really, not even a little bit?" while telling herself to stay calm and not hit him. The brilliant red roses in the garden appeared in close-up, and Ian stared at them intently with a serious expression, as if studying military tactics. He opened his mouth and hesitantly said 2 words. "The flowers," making Eloa hold her breath, waiting for some poetic or romantic comment. Unexpectedly, he concluded with a deadpan sentence, "are very red," causing Eloa to completely collapse. She wondered if she could actually reform this dry man in a year.
Eloa sat in a daze, her face full of helplessness and confusion, as she asked Ian in a tired tone if he knew anything important. She began to explain the philosophy that women like men who know how to communicate, while Ian naively asked, "So what?" still not understanding where the problem lay. Eloa radiated a sparkling aura, smiling to remind him of the obvious fact that I am a woman too, implying that he should behave a bit more delicately. Upon hearing this, Ian immediately put on a grimacing face full of disgust, making Eloa silently curse in her head because of his overly offensive attitude. She tried to suppress her anger and explained that women want men to enjoy the beauty of flowers with them, not a guy who only knows how to analyze the color of flowers like him. She specifically suggested that at the very least, he should praise the beautiful garden, or say that he is happy to drink tea with her on a beautiful sunny day, things like that which have emotion. Ian asked back if it was really necessary to say those empty words, making Eloa almost explode, swearing that if he weren't a swordmaster, she would have punched him. Eloa's face darkened, her hands tightly clutching her dress. She chanted to herself that a little patience brings great peace, to restrain her violence, wondering how many times she had to endure this. She picked up her teacup to drink to cool down, then calmly announced that perhaps she needed to add a new rule to this course. Slamming the teacup on the table with a clack, she firmly ordered, "From now on, you are forbidden to ask unnecessary questions," blocking his habit of talking back.
Eloa smiled brightly again, continuing her lecture, asking him to try saying something the other person wanted to hear, affirming that there is no woman in this world who hates sweet words. She cleared her throat to set an example, telling him to watch closely as this was a model practice by the teacher. She reached her slender hand forward, striking a graceful pose with dreamy eyes, ready to unleash her move. In the cheesiest tone possible, she said, "No matter how beautiful the flowers are, they cannot compare to the man standing before me," a flirtatious line heavily reeking of romance novels. Upon hearing this, Ian's face twisted, shivering with chills as if he had just swallowed a bug, his disgusted expression clearly visible. Seeing her husband's reaction, Iloa buried her face to hide her shame and miserable failure, sighing because she knew this case was too hopeless. Ian drank tea to soothe his stomach, while Iloa inwardly complained that saying one sweet word wouldn't kill anyone, yet he acted as if he were being tortured. She averted her eyes, consoling herself that at least his willingness to comment on the flowers was a bit of progress, suddenly remembering another important matter to announce. She mentioned the blank check, and Ian nodded to confirm he knew she had used it. His attitude remained indifferent, as if he didn't care about money. He also knew what she had bought, having heard she went to a clothing store. Iloa casually admitted it, saying she felt she had neglected herself for too long and planned to appear more at social parties from now on. She inwardly calculated that to help Diana later, she needed to build as many allies as possible right now. Suddenly, she noticed Ian's unusual silence and wondered if this was also a good opportunity to promote Madame Z's shop, but then froze when she saw his attitude. Ian exuded a terrifyingly gloomy aura, making Iloa panic, unable to understand why he looked so grumpy. Could it be that he regretted the money from the blank check?
Ian muttered about high society, saying he thought she would no longer be interested in such things after marriage. Iloa smiled confidently, saying that she had changed her mind. She couldn't just hole up in the mansion forever, and found meeting people right now to be important. Ian looked down, his expression thoughtful and somewhat annoyed, repeating the phrase, "meet more people," with an underlying tone. He looked up and stared at her, wavelength from Ian. The sound of the teacup being placed on the table rang out dryly. Iloa wondered why his tone sounded so sarcastic and bitter. She continued to explain that to find people in high society, she needed the family's reputation, so she hoped he would cooperate and lend her the title of Grand Duchess. A close-up showed Ian's eyes twitching with anger. He gritted his teeth and asked again, "So you intend to use the status of Grand Duchess?"
He leaned back in his chair, his expression extremely cold, finishing his sentence. "To go meet someone new? Well, if you want to put it that way, then yes." Ian let out a long sigh full of disappointment and frustration, turning his face away to hide the chaotic emotions in his heart. He reminded her of her promise upon marrying that she would not disgrace the family, warning her not to do anything unnecessary to give people more things to gossip about, even though she was already full of scandals. He sternly reminded her that regardless of anything, she was currently still a part of the Grand Duke's family, so she shouldn't forget her status. Iloa glared at him with sharp eyes, coldly retorting, "Who doesn't know that?" feeling insulted that he doubted her character. She said that exactly because she knew that, she agreed to cooperate with his idea of a fake married life. Then she realized the implication in his words, asking back, "Oh, is this a warning that I must be careful about who I meet?" The image of Ian sitting on the throne of power appeared, explaining that although he held the title of Duke, he was the Emperor's younger brother and still had the right to inherit the throne. He was being pressured by the imperial faction, so if Iloa went around meeting people carelessly, especially with the opposition, it would push Ian into a difficult political position. Iloa understood the problem, but still felt resentful, wondering why he always had to speak with such an unpleasant expression, acting as if she was about to commit adultery or do something terribly wrong. She angrily thought to herself that wasn't his loss of face mostly his own fault, but still committed to being careful not to harm the family. Ian drank tea, hiding his complex expression, while Iloa finalized a determined thought in her head, "At least until we get divorced." The image of the magnificent mansion under the afternoon sun appeared, but the caption signaled that the first weekend tea party had ended in awkwardness. Ian clutched his chest and coughed violently, seemingly choking on his tea or choking on his wife's blunt words throughout the conversation. He put the teacup down with a clack, his expression still maintaining its annoyance and sarcasm, showing no signs of reconciliation. Returning to her room, Iloa flopped down on the soft bed, breathing a sigh of relief because at least he was willing to follow her intentions, considering it a comfort. She lay on the bed thrashing about, frustrated because he kept asking meaningless questions even though he was forbidden to, wondering if he even paid attention to her words after all. It was truly incomprehensible. She sat up, sighing and bemoaning her fate, admitting that changing a person's nature was indeed a task harder than ascending to heaven. But remembering the scene where Ian politely offered his hand to escort her back to the main house on the second day, she smiled, realizing that the effort put in was not entirely meaningless. She sat in front of the dressing table, consoling herself that at least things weren't a total failure. It was also a good sign.
A week later, the maid came in to announce that Madame Z had arrived. Ilo was surprised because the boutique owner arrived earlier than expected. Ilo was secretly marveled at how fast time flew. It seemed like just a moment ago that a week had passed since she visited that shabby shop.
Bibi excitedly led the way, telling her mistress to go straight to the main fitting room because Madame Z had prepared everything perfectly. Looking at the maid, wondering why she was the one trying on the clothes, but Bibi was even more nervous and excited than her. The door opened, the room was bathed in light, and Madame Z was waiting next to luxurious clothing racks. Madame Z bowed in greeting, her demeanor much more professional and confident than their previous meeting at the old shop. Ela stepped inside, currently wearing a simple nightgown. Madame Z voiced her welcome to the Grand Duchess for the fitting session. A close-up of the satisfied smile on Ela's lips showed she was ready to admire the works of art she had invested in. She spoke with great momentum. "All right, shall we begin then?" her sharp eyes full of anticipation. 2 mannequins appeared, one wearing an elegant green dress, and the other a fiercely alluring red dress. Both were absolutely breathtaking. Madame Z introduced the dark green dress, saying she had altered it to Ela's exact measurements as originally requested. Then she pointed to the red dress, hesitantly saying that while altering it she had taken the liberty to change a few details and wasn't sure if her mistress would like that deviation. Madame Z explained that the dress was adorned with sapphires and emeralds to match her eye color, and the skirt was made puffier to flatter her figure. Ela stared intently at the red dress, her contemplative expression making the other two hold their breath waiting for the verdict. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she praised the red dress profusely, saying it was completely her taste, while Madame Z proudly declared it to be the masterpiece of her life. Ela turned to hold Madame Z's hands, affirming that she really liked this uniqueness, which moved the boutique owner because she had poured all her heart and soul into it. Madame Z smiled mysteriously, saying that was not all. She still had another special surprise for her.
She opened her hand, revealing a round jewel sparkling like a rainbow, and Iloa curiously asked what it was. Madame Z attached the jewel to the dress, and immediately a magical light enveloped the dress, creating a shimmering magical effect. The dress seemed to light up, the gemstones sparkling brilliantly, making Iloa exclaim in amazement, while Madame Z asserted that this was the highlight of the masterpiece. Iloa looked at the magical accessories, recalling that in the novel it was mentioned that tailors often used magic to decorate clothes, secretly marveling that this was indeed a high-tier fantasy world. Madame Z's eyes became sharp and serious, and she said, "Well then," as if preparing to command an important ritual. She urged Iloa, "Please try it on right away," unable to wait any longer to see her creation worn by its worthy owner. Iloa stepped out in a gorgeous red dress, her arrogant and seductive beauty leaving everyone in the room staring in breathless silence. She looked at herself in the mirror, nodding in assessment that with this level of luxury, this dress was completely worthy to be worn to a royal banquet. Hearing that, Madame Z's mouth dropped open in surprise. Madame Z hurriedly explained that this was just ready-to-wear clothing, meant to be used for light parties only. How could it be worn to a royal banquet? With eyes bright as stars, she tightly clenched her hands and swore that if it was a royal banquet, she would risk her life to make the young lady the most beautiful dress in the world, making Iloa sweat from the pressure. Suddenly, she remembered something and tentatively asked for her opinion. She pointed at the red dress, asking if she could wear it to attend Duchess Berlioz' seasonal banquet. Iloa recalled that Madame Berlioz' banquet was usually held around this time of the year. The mysterious figure of Duchess Berlioz holding a fan to cover her face, someone who had dominated high society for decades. Her banquets were compared to grand imperial feasts in terms of grandeur and scale. Iloa remembered that in the past, even if she received an invitation, the original Iloa rarely bothered to show her face to attend. Duchess Berlioz's 30th wedding anniversary banquet is becoming the hottest topic of discussion among the nobility, with ladies whispering about the unprecedented grand scale of this event. Shocking news was revealed that caused everyone to stir. The princess herself is also planning to attend, turning this banquet into the center of all attention. Iloa was startled upon hearing the title of the princess. She began to search her memory for this prominent figure, whose appearance always signaled political turmoil. That is Ian's half-sister, the only remaining legitimate heir of the royal lineage, after the other siblings had settled their positions, a formidable opponent. Currently, she is at the top of the throne's succession list, holding power and status that no one dares to underestimate. She is also the strategic trump card that the Emperor's faction is vigorously backing to create a counterbalance and directly confront Ian's forces.
Iloa recalled that in the original work, this princess character also played a significant role, being a catalyst for many important plot points in the story. She was the first to promote Madame Z's designs, creating a fashion trend, and was also a difficult villain who specialized in causing trouble for Diana later on. Just thinking about having to face her made Iloa's stomach ache. Right at that moment, her friend asked if the Duchess planned to attend the party. Iloa told herself that if it were the indifferent original owner from before, she definitely wouldn't care. But unfortunately, she was no longer the old Iloa. She decided to participate, considering this a golden opportunity to make a good impression on potential allies and a wise investment for the future. Madame Z cheered joyfully because she had perfectly guessed her mistress's intention, promising to adjust the dress even more to turn it into the most perfect masterpiece. The shop owner was burning with enthusiasm, determined to make Aloha stand out the most at the party to build her reputation, since this would be the first time she wore her clothes in public. Aloha forced a smile while talking on the phone, saying that making such a big deal out of it wasn't really necessary. However, since one of her goals was to help Madame Z become famous, she decided to let her freely create and show off her talents. Aloha sat at her desk to check her schedule and finalized that the party would take place next weekend, leaving not much time to prepare. Everything was happening sooner than expected, but she determined that it was time to start appearing in public to regain her status. However, the most difficult problem right now that made her hesitate was how to smoothly handle her difficult husband, Ian. Aloha walked down the hallway, looking elegant and confident, preparing for the clash with the final boss. Right at that moment, Ian appeared, and Aloha secretly thought, "Speak of the devil," as the two enemies on a narrow path met again. The two greeted each other with bland social pleasantries like, "Good afternoon." Yes, full of formalities like two strangers living in the same house.
Ian stared at his wife with an incomprehensible, scrutinizing gaze, seemingly noticing the change in her attire. He asked if she was planning to go out again, his tone a mix of curiosity and control. Aloha denied it, twirling around to show off her newly tailored casual dress and asking for his opinion, hoping he remembered the previous lesson. But seeing Ian's clueless lack of reaction, Aloha was furious. An image of her clenching her fists and screaming in her head appeared. "Where did the lesson I taught you fly off to?" She suppressed her anger, reminding him that even if he didn't look at her with sweet eyes, he should at least apply what he had learned to share his thoughts of it. Ian thought for a while with a serious expression and then made a blunt statement. "That is a calm blue," a typical response from a technical guy. Aloha was completely shocked, falling backward because she couldn't believe that after all her efforts in teaching, he could only squeeze out such a boring and dry sentence. She sighed in despair, suggesting that in times like these, he should say it suits her or she looks beautiful, but Ian only sighed wearily at this demand. She changed the subject to escape the awkward situation, saying that she was also planning to tell him about an important matter, that she was considering attending the grand 30th wedding anniversary party of Duchess Brillius. She smiled meaningfully, beating around the bush with a mysterious look. "So I was wondering if—" She made a straightforward and bold proposal. "Could you escort me, Grand Duke?" her eyes full of expectation. Ian was so surprised that he asked back, "Escort you?" Aloha nodded in firm confirmation with a confident smile. He asked again to clarify if she was really inviting him to attend Duchess Brillius's party together as a normal couple. Aloha smiled as bright as a flower, asserting without hesitation that she really wanted him to attend this event with her. Ian frowned in confusion, asking why with a face full of doubt and annoyance, as this was unprecedented. Aloha calmly replied that because this was also part of the husband curriculum she was teaching him, he couldn't shirk his responsibility. She explained that she urgently needed a public image overhaul to salvage her declining reputation. According to her, nothing was as effective as a couple appearing affectionately together at social events to quash all false rumors of discord. She reminded him of his promise to show her what a proper husband is, forcing him into a corner. Ian closed his eyes and sighed, seemingly realizing he couldn't refute his wife's sharp and perfectly reasonable logic. He agreed on the condition that it didn't clash with his schedule, but also warned beforehand that he couldn't change pre-planned personal schedules, truly a workaholic. Aloha clenched her fists, secretly guessing that he was probably planning to bury his head in some boring business meetings, but she had already anticipated this. Fortunately, the schedule was for next Sunday. She reminded him that he had promised to dedicate the weekend to her, so even if he didn't like it, he had to go and couldn't make excuses. Aloha noticed he never answered directly, but always beat around the bush. She told herself she didn't care whatever bad attitude he had towards her.
But the image of a fierce beast appearing behind her implied that if he dared to pull that behavior with her Diana, she swore she wouldn't let him off easily. She finalized the plan. The day before would be busy with fitting clothes, and after the party they would be tired, so this party would substitute for that weekend meeting altogether. Ian agreed immediately and was about to slip away to avoid trouble, but Aloha hastily called him back to wait because there was still an important matter to discuss. Ian turned around with a "what now" expression, which made Aloha secretly amused by the rare, rich expression on his usually cold face. She announced that she would invite a jeweler over during the week to order some jewelry, and incidentally, he also needed to rest a bit during the week. She clearly stated her intention to order a few extra brooches so they could wear matching tan-sur-tan outfits with the Grand Duke, creating a visual effect. Ian looked dumbfounded, wondering why it had to be brooches. He still couldn't understand the deep meaning behind this action. Aloha smiled radiantly and gave a blunt answer: to show off. This left Ian bewildered, asking, "Huh?" because he couldn't believe his ears at such a mundane reason. She explained more clearly that it was to boast about being escorted by him, a reason that couldn't be more pragmatic and straightforward. The harsh reality was revealed. This couple had never worn couple items, not even wedding rings, since they got married, a terrifyingly cold relationship. Ian inherently didn't understand the meaning of those items, while the former Aloha found them troublesome and dismissed them altogether, everyone living their own lives.
The fate of the wedding rings was probably lying covered in dust in some forgotten drawer, a testament to a loveless marriage. The serious problem was that even when Diana returned in the original story, this hateful, indifferent attitude of his remained unchanged.
Diana once gave him a brooch as a gift that contained so much of the innocent female lead's heart, but Ian flatly refused to wear it, reasoning that it was unnecessary to wear couple items, a painful slap in the face to the giver. He didn't wear it until the very end of the story, a detail that made Iloa's blood boil with anger every time she remembered it, clenching her fists in indignation on behalf of her idol. Diana's fans even had to make their own brooches to wear in support of their idol because the male lead was too heartless, while Iloa bitterly bought 10 of them to make a point. She decided to change this terrible script, because now that she is Iloa, she couldn't stand by and watch Diana get hurt because of this insensitive man. She concluded with Ian with an intimidating smile that this was a notification, not a proposal, and Ian had to swallow his pride and accept his fate. She's stay. Ian nodded reluctantly to get it over with so he could go to work. Ian said goodbye and was about to leave. Iloa also politely greeted back, thinking the conversation had ended.
Suddenly she stopped and looked at him. Iloa asked in surprise if there was anything else, or if he had changed his mind about going. He stared at her, and then dropped a belated but completely unexpected compliment. "The dress suits you." Iloa froze, her eyes wide, sweating profusely, because she was so shocked by the sudden compliment from this 1,000-year-old iceberg. Ian turned his face away, looking a bit embarrassed after uttering a sentence contrary to his usual personality, his ears probably a little red. Iloa recalled the lesson she had just taught him earlier. It turned out this guy also knew how to apply theory into practice, so he wasn't entirely hopeless. Ian called back that he had given the answer she wanted, like reciting a lesson to pay off a debt so he wouldn't be nagged. He walked straight away, his footsteps fading, leaving Iloa standing there dumbfounded, watching her husband's back with mixed emotions. She smirked, wondering if she should consider this a sincere compliment or an insult to her intelligence. But anyway, it was a step forward. Thursday arrived, bringing pouring rain, a gray sky, and roaring thunder enveloping the magnificent mansion. Iloa, wearing an elegant black dress, stood waiting, wondering about the loud noise outside, feeling a bit anxious because of the bad weather. Ian appeared in a charming black shirt, asked if she had slept well, and praised the beautiful weather while a storm was raging outside. The thunder roared, as if to mock Ian's comment about the beautiful weather, leaving Iloa speechless at her husband's mechanical and rigid behavior. Anyway, there was some progress in his greeting, so she smiled back and informed him that the jeweler was waiting in the first-floor living room. Ian was about to go first, but Iloa looked at him with meaningful eyes, as if she was plotting a bold move. She subtly reminded him, "What are you doing? Aren't you going to hold my hand?" A rare intimate gesture made the atmosphere pause. Ian was startled, his face showing a hint of confusion and surprise at being suddenly attacked by his wife with this romantic action. The two of them walked into the living room hand in hand, creating a perfect picture of a power couple in the eyes of outsiders. The jeweler bowed deeply to welcome them warmly, feeling grateful and honored to serve the two noble masters at the same time. Iloa smiled gently, telling him to raise his head and get straight to business, exuding the demeanor of a powerful mistress. She asked if he had prepared the matching brooches as she had requested earlier, looking forward to seeing the results. The jeweler laid out a whole fortune of sparkling jewelry, from necklaces and bracelets to rings, saying he had prepared a full set just to be safe in case she changed her mind. Iloa smiled, smiling awkwardly because he was overly enthusiastic, practically bringing the entire jewelry store here, truly a professional merchant. She turned to ask Ian if any piece caught his eye, hoping he would cooperate in choosing one for formality's sake. Ian glanced over and coldly, decisively uttered a single word, "No," extinguishing everyone's hope and excitement.
Iloa was so furious, her lungs felt like exploding, secretly cursing that every time he answered so curtly, a tray should fall on his head to cure him of his obnoxious habit. She tried to suppress her anger, pointing at a uniquely designed necklace to strike up a conversation, hoping to salvage the awkward atmosphere. Ian poured cold water on her, criticizing that the model was last year's trend, and even sarcastically remarked that because she didn't care before, she knew nothing about trends. Iloa suppressed her anger and moved on to a gemstone flower bracelet. Ian again criticized it, saying it looked more like a lamp than a flower, his level of bluntness reaching the absolute peak. Iloa had to continuously chant a mantra of patience in her head so she wouldn't lunge at him and tear him apart right there in front of outsiders. She reminded herself that the main purpose today was for the jeweler to witness the scene of a harmonious couple and spread the rumors everywhere. It turned out this meeting wasn't simply about shopping, but a carefully calculated PR move by Iloa. If Madame Z was the eyes and ears gathering news, this well-connected jeweler was the most effective loudspeaker to spread rumors. Iloa clenched her fists full of determination, concluding that the mission of these people was to spread their fake love story to the world to pave the way for the future. Ian held a brooch in his hand, and Iloa excitedly asked what he thought of this item, a radiant smile on her lips, as if anticipating an compliment.
Ian leaned back, his face full of confusion as if he didn't understand what was happening. He hesitantly asked again what it was.
Iloa leaned in close, whispered to him to stand still, and personally adjusted the brooch on his shirt, the rustling of clothes echoing in their close proximity. Deep down, Iloa told herself that, at least until Diana returned, she had to groom Ian into a man loved by all, even if he wasn't the most perfect groom right now. She smiled at the thought of the future, believing that this way, when the two of them fell in love, the dignity of the female lead Diana would be fully preserved. She was determined not to let him become a terrible man who only had an ambiguous affair with Diana after being divorced by his wife. Her eyes flashed with determination as she adjusted her husband's clothes. Ian silently looked at the velvet box containing a pair of purple heart-shaped brooches with an exquisite wing design. He tentatively asked if she liked this model. She glanced over and nodded, admitting that among the items here, it was indeed the one she liked the most. Ian commented that this item would go very well with her red dress and match her eye color perfectly. Hearing that, Iloa immediately finalized the purchase. However, Iloa was extremely frustrated inside, glaring at him fiercely, secretly blaming his superficial and absent-minded attitude, lacking any enthusiasm at all. She forced a smile, gently asking the Grand Duke to look at her for a moment, beginning to implement the next step of her plan. Ian blankly asked what she meant, still holding the brooch she had just handed him, completely missing the signal. Iloa pinned the brooch on his chest, nodding in satisfaction and praising that this piece of jewelry suited him very well and looked beautiful on him.
The jeweler quickly closed the deal, endlessly praising the two masters' aesthetic taste and rambling on about the meaning of sharing a heart with this pair of brooches. Iloa wanted to go crazy listening to those cheesy words. She ground her teeth, suppressing the urge to tear her heartless husband in half right on the spot. She asked him to put the other one on her. Ian pointed at himself and asked back, "Me?" with a look of disbelief. Iloa held out the brooch and retorted, "If not him, then who?" Was she supposed to have the jeweler put it on her? Which made the jeweler standing next to them break into a cold sweat. She leaned close to his ear to remind him of their previous agreement, whispering a command that he should take this opportunity to say some nice words while putting it on her. Ian looked at the item in his hand with great hesitation, while Iloa glared at him sharply, her eyes warning him not to even think about escaping. A close-up showed Ian's slender hand carefully holding the brooch, preparing to perform the reluctant task. The scene suddenly became unusually romantic as Ian bent down and gently pinned the brooch onto Iloa's chest. Iloa smiled brightly, looking up to ask him how it looked, expecting an answer exactly like the script she had fed in. Ian stood staring at her, silent for a long time, causing the atmosphere to become awkward again. Finally, he let out an exhausted sigh, as if playing the role of a romantic husband drained a lot of his energy. He dropped a comment that she was even more beautiful than that brooch, a sentence that seemed straight out of a romance novel but was uttered with a look of resignation. Ian turned his face away to hide his embarrassment, muttering a compliment that she was very beautiful, which surprised even the listener. Iloa froze in shock for a few seconds. Seeing his wife silent, Ian turned back and cleared his throat, calling out, "Hey, madam," to check her reaction. Iloa regained her composure, confidently flipping her hair, and thinking to herself that it wasn't a compliment, it was just an obvious truth. She was already beautiful. Was he kidding her? Ian looked at her, speechless, while the assistant behind them gasped in astonishment at the rare affectionate interaction between his two masters. The assistant cleared his throat and asked if they needed the remaining one wrapped in a box. Iloa coldly told him to just pack it neatly into the box.
The jeweler seized the opportunity to introduce an additional service of enchanting fragrances into the gemstones, advertising that this was a very popular trend right now. Iloa curiously asked if it was really so, listening to the jeweler explain that couples who share the same scent would become more closely bonded. The image of the sparkling pair of brooches appeared, promising to emit a particularly alluring fragrance when worn. Iloa rubbed her chin thoughtfully, smacking her lips as she realized the extra cost for this service was quite steep, no joke. Surprisingly, Ian generously closed the deal by saying it wasn't bad and to just do it, leaving both Iloa and the assistant wide-eyed with astonishment. Cutting to a sunlit garden, a peaceful tea party was beautifully set up under the cool green canopy of trees. Ian and Iloa sat across from each other, drinking tea, enjoying the rare, relaxing atmosphere of a beautiful afternoon. Ian started by commenting that she seemed to really like the pair of brooches. Iloa smiled and nodded, admitting, "Yes, I like them a lot." She secretly thought that, to be exact, she was more satisfied with the progress of the plan than the item itself, then took a sip of tea and sarcastically remarked that he seemed to dislike them. The clinking sound of the teacup being placed on the saucer rang out clearly. Ian seemed about to offer a dissenting opinion. He crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and bluntly stated that he would borrow her words, as he saw no necessity in wearing couple items just for show. He affirmed that he didn't understand the meaning of it, nor had he ever heard of a relationship being redefined solely by some trivial accessories. Iloa looked down at her teacup, heap in thought, worried that if she just left it alone, he would blurt out such insensitive words in front of Diana. She looked up and questioned him directly, asking if that was the reason he never wore a wedding ring, because he found it bothersome and the two of them had never agreed on it. The image of intertwined hands wearing rings appeared, as Iloa began to explain why people share the items that he considered meaningless. Ian pointed at his chest, asking, "Me?" looking as clueless as a child listening to a lecture about love.
Iloa put a hand to her forehead and let out a long sigh, muttering that perhaps she had expected too much regarding the subtlety of this block of wood. She looked into her teacup, gently asking him in return that if it was truly as meaningless as he said, then why do lovers or close friends like to exchange rings or use couple items? Ian remained silent, his eyes contemplative as he pondered the tough question that hit his emotional blind spot. Iloa turned to look out at the vibrant flower garden, the wind blowing her hair, as she concluded with a profound truth. It is because emotions are invisible.
The young man asked the girl about the hidden meaning behind her words. She calmly explained that when someone wants to prove a special relationship but feels insecure due to the lack of a tangible connection, they will often look for something to substitute as proof. Hearing this, the Grand Duke wondered if that was the reason she had made this proposal to him. The young woman laughed and denied it immediately, asserting that their situation was fundamentally different from what she had just described. She bluntly reiterated the harsh reality that neither of them had any romantic feelings for each other. To her, this was essentially just to show off to the world. No matter what the truth of their relationship was, outsiders would still see it as a symbol of their bond. He pondered for a moment and said that he understood her point, at least for the time being. Before ending the conversation, she reminded him that in the future, if he found someone he truly cared about, he should remember the words she said today. The scene shifted to the Grand Duke's office with new developments. She smiled meaningfully, repeating the advice that he should keep this in mind for his own future if he found true love.
Alone in the room, he held the jewelry in his hand and wondered when she had started to change. In his memory, she had never been the type of person to be so decisive and bothersome. He sighed, looking at the sparkling purple brooch, secretly thinking that romantic affairs were ridiculous. He considered all this romance nonsense and was about to put the item away. While he was muttering about the meaninglessness of love, there was a knock, asking for permission to enter the room. Kai, the red-haired assistant, walked in with a thick stack of documents in his hands and greeted his master. He coldly reminded Kai that he was exactly 10 minutes late compared to the request. Kai was surprised to see his master intently looking at something other than the usual dry paperwork. He screamed when he realized it was a precious piece of jewelry and claimed he had seen everything. He yelled at him not to be disrespectful, but Kai just chuckled, asking if he had seen through his master's mind. Kai sneakily teased someone who valued time like him for sitting in a daze, daydreaming in broad daylight. The assistant suddenly had a thought and exclaimed with doubt, as if he had just discovered a huge secret. Kai smirked triumphantly, asking if he was going to use this jewelry to win back the Grand Duchess's favor, which made him furious. A loud noise echoed from the mansion in the dark night, signaling a physical altercation. Kai held his head and wailed. Although he had apologized, he still complained that the punch was too heavy-handed. He lamented that a strike from a swordmaster was unbearable for a frail commoner, but he just coldly told him to shut up. Despite the pain, Kai did not give up. He knelt down and asked if it was really jewelry after all. When he confirmed it was, Kai excitedly guessed again if he bought it for his wife, because he had hit the nail on the head. Frustrated, he directly called out the name Kai LJJ and intended to clarify the situation. Kai still looked at him warily, pressing to see if he really intended to give that gift to her. He finally revealed the shocking truth that the Grand Duchess herself was the one who had given him the item. Kai was so shocked that his jaw dropped, unable to believe his ears at this incredibly unexpected news. He immediately interrogated what exactly had happened between the two of them over the past few days, but he just replied curtly that nothing had happened. Kai was not resigned and pressed further, asking why she would give him a gift if nothing had happened, but he just coldly asked back if he had any objections. Kai's face clearly showed delight, as if he had just discovered a new goldmine of gossip.
He gleefully thought that his advice had actually been useful, prompting him to remind him not to be too arrogant. Kai continued to tease, asking if he was worried because he was afraid of divorce, since he wouldn't be able to find anyone as talented as her anywhere else. He quickly slipped away to dodge his murderous aura, while asking when he would finally pin that brooch on his shirt. He was annoyed because Kai had asked too many unnecessary things during work today. He silently stared into the void, his eyes clearly showing contemplation about what was happening. He recalled her suggestion that she wanted him to accompany her to the party at the Duchy of Brillius. Kai froze once again in astonishment upon hearing about their plan to attend the party together. He worriedly asked if the two of them had taken the wrong medicine to change so drastically that he didn't know how to properly react. Seeing him getting truly angry, Kai hastily raised his hands in frantic apology to preserve his life. Kai thought the Grand Duchess was truly generous and trying to nurture their relationship, but he skeptically asked in return if that looked like an effort. The assistant affirmed that it did and advised him to seize this opportunity so they could get closer to each other. He tightly gripped the paper in his hand, his heart clearly showing conflict and confusion over his wife's changes. The image of her smiling brightly, yet affirming that they didn't love each other, reappeared in his mind. He stared at the luxurious jewelry box placed on the table and remained silent.
He told himself that such romantic feelings would never happen. Time passed, and the day of the party at the Duchy of Brillius had arrived. The atmosphere of preparation was extremely bustling. She stood before the mirror, feeling the excitement of the surrounding maids as they prepared her. She appeared gorgeously in a radiant red dress, making the onlookers exclaim that she was as beautiful as an angel. When praised as the most beautiful person in the world, she humbly smiled and denied it. Deep down, she always assumed that Diana was the true goddess of beauty in her heart. She thought to herself that in exactly 1 year, the new master of this house would be the one holding that title of the most beautiful. She smiled and bid farewell to her maid Bibi to prepare to depart in time for the party. She walked down the long staircase of the mansion, where he was already waiting at the bottom in a white outfit. As soon as she saw him, she couldn't help but be amazed and secretly admired her husband's outstanding appearance. She internally marveled that a handsome face truly makes all the difference. He looked strangely elegant in white.
Seeing her standing there staring blankly at him, he immediately spoke up and asked if she planned to stand there all day. She irritably replied that he was only good on the outside and that it would be better if he knew how to keep quiet, then walked over to him. Approaching him, she politely asked if he had been waiting for her for a long time. He relentlessly replied that he had waited exactly 10 minutes and asserted that she was late, leaving her speechless. She was so angry that she trembled, thinking to herself that he was exactly the type of person who spoke bluntly without respecting anyone, just like those who speak insolently online. She muttered that if it weren't for that face, he would have been considered a lonely old man a long time ago. She smiled and reminded him that in these situations, he should say subtle things to avoid making others feel awkward. She dedicatedly explained to him the concept of a white lie or the necessary care in communication. She kept a smile on her lips, but inwardly told herself that she didn't even care or want to understand more about him anyway. She demanded that from now on, he should just say that he had just arrived, because women sometimes really need that subtlety from men. The carriage rolled towards the party, beginning a journey full of calculations. Sitting in the carriage, she felt depressed and told herself she had to settle everything properly before Diana returned. Seeing her close her eyes, he immediately spoke up and asked if she was casually dozing off right here. She sighed and told herself that she needed to take small steps carefully to achieve her goal. She determined that this was her comeback debut in high society, and she needed to do it really well. She needed to firmly consolidate her position so that later it could serve as a premise to help Diana. Seeing her deep in thought, he turned to ask what exactly she was facing that made her look so serious. She used the excuse to ask if he had ever attended any parties at Duke Brillius's place before to gather information.
He confirmed that he had been there once when he was still a prince. She asked him to tell her if there was anything special to keep in mind for this party. He looked puzzled by her question and said that she should be the one who knows the nobility best. He reminded her that she had been incredibly prominent in high society right from her early debut days. She replied that things are very different now, especially since she hadn't attended any events since getting married. He advised her to just do what she always does, because after all, she already has her own purpose for this trip. She realized he had no intention of cooperating further beyond the minimum requirements, and he admitted to it. She asked him to at least behave politely and kindly until they reached the party gates to save face. He kept a cold expression and didn't reply, making her tell herself that she would enjoy the party in her own way.
She thought that such a separation would be less troublesome for both parties. She reiterated that the main goal was for everyone to see their good relationship through the act of arriving together, and it would be fine even if they separated afterward. He briefly replied that he fully understood her request. She smiled sarcastically, silently blaming him for not even bothering to give her an empty promise to make her feel better. The carriage arrived, and the luxurious and magnificent scenery of the duchy appeared before their eyes. The guards welcomed them with utmost respect and professionalism upon seeing the convoy. She looked out the window with sad eyes, thinking that Diana was originally the one who deserved this respectful treatment. She silently blamed the character Ian for his stupidity that caused Diana to miss this position, then turned to look at him with an extremely frustrated expression. When he questioned that sharp glare, she immediately waved her hand and said it was nothing, but inwardly told herself she would beat him up after the divorce. He stepped out of the carriage first and politely offered his hand to help her down, in accordance with proper etiquette. The simultaneous appearance of the powerful couple caused all the ladies present to be amazed and start gossiping. The crowd grew even more excited upon realizing that both were wearing identical brooches, exactly as her show-off plan intended. She softly reminded him to remember her words and to behave very politely as they proceeded together toward the banquet's greenhouse. The story continues as she firmly asked Ian to take her to the banquet location, and he only briefly replied in agreement. The two began to walk side by side. The appearance of the powerful couple immediately attracted everyone's gaze. Ian spoke up, bringing up what she had once said about attending social gatherings actually being for meeting new people, and she calmly confirmed that it was true.
He looked around and asked back whether the scale and atmosphere of this party were truly as she had described. She looked at the bustling crowd and explained that parties like this were primarily a gathering place for the aristocracy, young ladies, and their companions. Ian appeared skeptical, commenting that this scene looked a bit different from the actual purpose she was aiming for. She paused slightly, asking blankly what he meant and whether he was misunderstanding her intentions. In her thoughts, she told herself that if it were for business or political purposes, appearing at royal banquets organized by the royal family would make much more sense. She affirmed that she had a completely different purpose, and the most important goal today was to meet a special person. Hearing the phrase about someone she absolutely had to meet, Ian's footsteps suddenly halted in surprise. He turned to look at her with a sharp gaze, pressing to find out the identity of the person she was so eager to meet. She maintained a calm attitude, admitting that in fact she came here primarily for the presence of that figure. Memories of the original story surfaced in her mind. It was a princess who constantly caused trouble for Diana, but was the only one who found Madame Z. She made up her mind that she had to confront this person today, hoping to convince her to stand on a side beneficial to Diana. Ian recalled her previous assertion that she didn't have her eyes on anyone, his voice tinged with displeasure. She asked in surprise what his problem was, then nodded to confirm that she had indeed said so. Ian's hands clenched tightly, showing clear annoyance at his wife's indifferent answer. He probed to see if recently anyone else had accidentally caught her eye.
She was stunned, not understanding why Ian was suddenly so interested in her private romantic affairs. She thought to herself that she didn't want this attention at all and wondered why he was showing such intense, unusual interest. She further explained that she had actually wanted to meet this person for a long time, even before she transmigrated into this body, but just hadn't had the chance. Ian muttered in a low voice, repeating her words about waiting for the opportunity for so long, looking as if he was deducing things in a very different direction. Seeing his overly serious attitude, she felt a bit confused and wondered if she should just spell it out plainly to be done with it. She looked at her husband's tense expression and considered whether she should clearly explain her purpose to him. However, she suddenly remembered that Ian and that princess were half-siblings, so revealing that she was wary of her didn't seem to bring any benefits. She laughed it off, saying that Ian was not the right person to pass on messages and promised to explain everything in detail at another time. The atmosphere of the party in the greenhouse appeared magnificent as the guests began to gather in large numbers. Having arrived, she panicked upon realizing that Ian still had no intention of letting go of her hand, making her feel extremely strange. To her astonishment, Ian suddenly bowed his head and placed a solemn kiss on the back of her hand. She froze for a few seconds, her eyes wide as she wondered what this impulsive action of his actually meant. Her face flushed red with embarrassment. She mentally yelled at him, asking what the hell he was doing in front of so many people. Ian looked at her with an unfathomable deep gaze, then wished her a good time at the party. After performing that shocking act, he calmly turned and walked away, leaving her alone amidst the buzzing crowd. She was still in shock, standing dazed, wondering what had just really happened with her cold husband. She suspected Ian had eaten something wrong this morning, as he kept doing things he had never done before. Looking at her hand, she felt that the kiss was not like a romantic gesture, but rather a heavy declaration of sovereignty. She took a sip of wine, trying to calm herself down to observe the surrounding atmosphere before starting her plan. Knowing she was attracting too much attention, she decided to stand still in one place to sort out who would be the first to approach her. She looked around, silently evaluating each face to determine who was an ally and who was a potential enemy. She realized that in the current situation, finding someone with genuine goodwill towards her among these nobles was harder than plucking stars from the sky. A group of stylish young ladies approached to greet her, appearing polite on the outside, but their eyes held a scrutinizing look. Isabella Howard, the second daughter of the Marquis, looked overly surprised to see the Grand Duchess appear at a party like this. Hearing the name Isabella Howard, she paused for a moment and tried to remember where she had heard this name before. A flash of light crossed her mind, and she recognized who the character standing in front of her was in the original story. According to the old plot, Isabella was the one who constantly stalked and caused all kinds of trouble for Diana at every social event for trivial reasons. She silently marveled at witnessing Diana's nemesis with her own eyes, someone who was famous for her sophisticated bogey tricks. She recalled that Isabella Howard was the youngest daughter of the Marquis, who had harbored a deep, unrequited love for Ian for a long time, but was ruthlessly rejected by him. When Diana returned and had intimate gestures with Ian, Isabella could not stand it and began to scheme to harm the poor girl. With jealousy blinding her eyes, Isabella stopped at nothing to bully Diana, making her life in the Empire difficult. She remembered most clearly the detail where Isabella deliberately spilled wine to ruin the sky-blue dress that Diana cherished dearly right at the beginning of the story. Thinking of how sad Diana was, she suddenly felt angry, but Isabella unexpectedly spoke up, interrupting her train of thought. Isabella pretended to apologize for bothering her and asked about her situation in a very formal manner. She warily watched Isabella's sudden friendly attitude, silently wondering what she was scheming by acting so warm like this. Isabella sarcastically remarked that it was normally very difficult to catch sight of the Grand Duchess in public social gatherings. Another lady in the group chimed in, recalling that the last time they saw her was at the Empress's birthday party last year. They feigned astonishment, asking how busy she was to leave high society thirsting for her presence for a whole year.
Isabella sneered and added that people were whispering to each other that meeting her was even harder than getting an audience with members of the royal family. She realized that these young ladies were joining forces to mock her, but she still maintained a calm expression to continue listening to their act. One of them asserted that she was indeed a high-priced figure and extremely hard to approach. They whispered and discussed among themselves, wondering if she was the person with the most expensive face in the entire empire. She stood silently in sarcasm, clearly feeling the hostility hiding beneath the fake compliments. She thought to herself that Isabella was certainly not someone to be trifled with, and the feeling of truly living in the body of a hated character suddenly became overwhelmingly real. Isabella changed the subject, asking back if it wasn't true that she came here with Grand Duke Ian.
Another young lady giggled, stating bluntly that everyone knew the relationship between her and the Grand Duke was completely unlike other couples. She looked straight at the triumphant crowd, her eyes flashing with a cold glint that caused the surrounding atmosphere to suddenly drop. She wondered if they really wanted to start a war with her just to curry favor with the daughter of a marquis. Isabella mocked that if it were her, she would be extremely embarrassed to only be escorted to the door by her husband and then left all alone like that. Her hand tightly gripped the hem of her dress. She could endure them insulting her, but absolutely could not sit still when they mentioned Diana in that tone. She realized these people were deliberately trying to humiliate her dignity and dragging Diana in to act as a shield for their harsh words. A mysterious smile appeared on her lips, signaling that she would not let this group of young ladies say whatever they pleased. She suddenly changed her attitude, smiling radiantly and thanking everyone for giving her such special attention. The young ladies were uniformly dumbfounded, unable to believe their ears at her bizarrely positive reaction. She leisurely walked forward, causing those who were whispering to suddenly fall silent and feel an invisible pressure weighing down on them. She said that if she had known she and Ian were getting this much attention, she should have met and chatted with them sooner. She confessed in a feigned, shy tone that she had also felt a bit embarrassed earlier. Isabella hastily agreed right away, thinking she had struck a weak spot that made her feel ashamed. But she turned the tables by explaining that she wanted to go alone, yet it was Ian who insisted on escorting her at all costs. She complained that even though she told him not to make a fuss, he stubbornly insisted on coming along, which put her in a very awkward position. She smiled brightly and asked in return how she had the heart to refuse when her husband was so eager to show his care. Isabella was completely frozen, her face losing its color, and she could not utter a word upon hearing about Ian's initiative toward his wife. She thought to herself that their provocation was truly outdated and wondered if anyone had ever taught them that playing with sharp knives could eventually lead to getting cut. She dealt another painful blow by bringing up the fact that Lady Howard, despite being of age, had not yet received any marriage proposals. Isabella stammered in defense, claiming that she just didn't want to think about marriage at the moment. She pretended to panic, asking if she had misspoken and offended the young lady, while inwardly gloating. She continued to rub salt into the wound by recalling a rumor she once heard that Isabella had secretly loved someone for a long time. She giggled and asked who the mysterious man's identity was that caused Isabella such heartache that she had to cling to Ian in the past.
Isabella was trembling with anger, her fists clenched so tightly that the people around her began to feel scared. She bluntly asked what right someone who was suffering from a hopeless unrequited love like Isabella had to judge the romantic affairs of others. Isabella screamed, asking what the hell she just said, while the accompanying ladies began to step back to avoid getting involved. She calmly quoted a book she had just read, saying that those who were dissatisfied with their own lives tend to scrutinize and badmouth others. Isabella was speechless, her face turning bright red with embarrassment and anger at being exposed in the middle of the crowd. A disdainful click of the tum rang out, making the atmosphere around Isabella even more suffocating and pathetic. The curious gazes and snickers from the other guests made Isabella feel as if all her secrets were being stripped bare. She coldly warned that if one intended to attack others, they must also be mentally prepared to be retaliated against in equal measure. She changed her tone to a soft, sarcastic one, saying that she really admired those who persevered with unrequited love and offered to help Isabella. Isabella panicked and told her to wait a moment, not understanding what her so-called help was truly intended for. She smiled as brightly as a flower, looked straight into Isabella's eyes, and firmly asserted that the person she was secretly pining for was none other than Ian. She reiterated the truth that the entire aristocracy knew but no one dared to speak about regarding Isabella's blind affection for Ian Claude. She squeezed Isabella's hand, saying meaningfully that it would be quite troublesome if the person she fell in love with was already a taken man.
Ending the confrontation, she reminded Isabella not to waste her effort on a married man and to have more self-respect in her behavior. Ilua mockingly asked Lady Howard if she had managed to confess her feelings to her dream man yet, making her visibly flustered. Even though Howard tried to act nice and offered to help her return a favor, Ilua still coldly refused because she didn't want to be involved in any debt. Seeing that the other party still wouldn't let it go, Ilua questioned why she had so much free time to pry into other people's family matters. She bluntly told Howard to stop being a busybody and demanded that she stop sticking her nose into her life.
Iloa's gaze hardened with immense pressure, while Howard began to feel terrified by this sudden sternness. Howard was stunned, seemingly still unable to believe that the original gentle Iloa uttered such sharp and cold words. Iloa repeated Howard's own words, that being excessively curious about other people's affairs was extremely tactless. Witnessing the retort harsher than salted lime, Howard could only stand frozen, drops of sweat starting to fall as she was left speechless. In the distance, Princess Louisa began to notice the good show and smiled meaningly at Iloa's change. The young ladies accompanying Howard could only hold their breath, no one daring to utter a single word before the authority of the mansion's lady. Iloa publicly criticized the lack of self-respect of those who liked to gossip, asserting that if they had drawn their swords, they should at least know how to use them. Her sharp blue eyes seemed to pierce through the hearts of those harboring malicious intentions around her. Turning to the gathered nobles, Iloa affirmed that the warning just now was not only for Howard alone, but for all of them. She emphasized that suddenly taking an excessive interest in others' private matters was an extremely rude action. Iloa began her exposure by reminding Countess Edward about her son being suspended from school due to delinquent behavior. Continuing to air dirty laundry, she brought up the fact that Madame Harrison's husband used the excuse of going to work to gamble away their entire family fortune at the casino. She mocked the hypocritical nobles, stating that there was no one who didn't have dirty secrets hidden in dark corners. Iloa calmly asked if anyone else wanted her to inquire about their health and continue exposing the truth, rendering the entire hall completely silent. Faced with her opponent's steely resolve, Howard completely collapsed, no longer able to maintain her usual arrogance. She stammered an apology, admitting she had crossed the line, and hoping Iloa would overlook her recent rudeness.
Iloa immediately changed her expression, smiling and saying that she was only giving a gentle reminder to prevent Howard from being misunderstood by others. After putting her in her place, Iloa added another painful blow by saying she was too busy with the duties of a duchess to remember to invite them over. She looked with disdain at the expression of Howard, who had just been completely crushed by her in the middle of a crowd. Howard quietly took her leave in humiliation, no longer having the face to stay at the party for another second. Seeing their leader retreat, the accompanying ladies also hurriedly sneaked away after leaving behind a few awkward pleasantries. Iloa sneered, thinking to herself that it would be best for such brainless people not to tire themselves out by mocking others. Princess Louisa burst out laughing, seemingly very satisfied to witness such an interesting drama. Iloa was startled and turned around upon hearing the laughter, realizing that the most influential figure in the empire was approaching her.
Louisa laughed heartily, asserting that this was the most ridiculous thing she had ever seen at noble parties. Louisa's identity was revealed. She is Ian's half-sister and the first in line to inherit the throne. Louisa did not hesitate to praise Iloa, considering the Duchess to be a very different and interesting person. Louisa's appearance completely changed the atmosphere of the party, with all attention focused on the two powerful women. Although surprised, Iloa maintained proper etiquette, formally welcoming Princess Louisa Eugenia Celis Levant. Louisa brushed off the cumbersome formalities, took a sip of wine, and declared that the greetings were enough. The crowd began to whisper, calling Louisa a walking time bomb because of her erratic temper and tendency to do whatever she pleased. In reality, Louisa was ready to get angry at anyone who displeased her, and most of the nobles here had been her victims. Diana had also been made miserable by the princess. Louisa was simply a mad woman who gave face to no one. Louisa asked how Iloa had been since their last meeting at the Empress's birthday banquet, while Iloa maintained a calm demeanor to cope. The princess criticized the party for being as dull as always, except for the big explosion Iloa had just caused. Outwardly smiling, Iloa was quite worried inside, knowing Louisa was much more serious and unpredictable than Isabella. She reminded herself that the main reason she was here was because of the princess, who had just declared she came only because it was too noisy. Louisa was curious as to what brought someone who rarely went out like Iloa to this gathering. She sarcastically remarked that Iloa's face was even more precious and harder to see than a member of the royal family, which was why people often joked about it. Iloa smiled in return, saying she couldn't just isolate herself in the mansion forever, and that socializing was the duty of a lady. Louisa looked at Iloa with skeptical eyes, starting to notice something was not quite right with this woman. The princess remarked that Iloa seemed to have transformed into a completely different person, which made her feel extremely astonished. Iloa was startled, wondering if Louisa was being too sharp and seeing through the deep changes within her. She hurriedly tried to do damage control, laughing and saying no one could be like her, but Louisa still maintained a probing expression.
Louisa asserted that when it comes to blandness and rigidity, Iloa and the Duke are the champion couple of the Empire. Louisa joked even further by clarifying that both of them tied for first place in boring others. Iloa grimaced at being lumped together with that guy, thinking to herself that being underestimated like this was no fun at all. Louisa seemed excited because it was the first time she saw Iloa publicly humiliate someone, which was a completely new thing. Seeing the princess looking amused, Iloa told herself that such a start was not a bad way to begin her plan. She smiled modestly, saying that she had no intention of embarrassing anyone, but was glad to have entertained the princess. Louisa admitted that she previously thought Iloa was a rigid type of person, but it turned out the truth was much more interesting. The princess smiled radiantly, declaring that she was starting to like Iloa because of the refreshing feeling she brought. Iloa secretly sighed in relief and thanked her, quietly rejoicing that things were going more smoothly than expected. She realized that if she could pull the princess to her side, Diana's future path would be cleared of more than half of its obstacles. To curry favor, Iloa praised Louisa's dress as gorgeous and asked if she had personally directed the tailor to make it. Louisa smugly asked Iloa if this dress reminded her of anything special. Iloa pretended to think of a trick, knowing well that this was a psychological test Louisa often used to give others a hard time. She clapped her hands, praising that the dress was truly beautiful and that it reminded her of the rolling waves in the ocean. Louisa was deeply shocked, unable to understand how Iloa could guess her intentions so easily and accurately. The reality was that Louisa had once scolded Diana and everyone else who couldn't see her ocean wave design concept.
Iloa further explained that the hem of the dress looked exactly like the waves crashing against the cliffs in the southern region that she had once seen. Louisa excitedly confirmed that she was indeed inspired after visiting the cliffs in the southern Etany region. Iloa chuckled to herself, knowing full well that Louisa had rambled about this for 3 whole pages and even taken Diana hostage to listen to her story. Louisa stared intently at Iloa, asking once again if she was truly the woman she used to know. Being seen through, Iloa silently criticized the princess for being unnecessarily perceptive, then covered her embarrassment by saying that people's tastes always change. Louisa began to scrutinize Iloa's dress again and realized this was the first time she had seen such a unique design. Iloa explained that the decorations on the hem were not ordinary jewelry, but magic stones, capable of shining brilliantly in the dark. Louisa marveled, becoming completely captivated by Iloa's novel and powerful fashion style. The princess pressed to know who the tailor was, because she knew for sure Iloa could not have designed such an exquisite outfit herself. Iloa noticed that Louisa's gaze was exactly like Madame Z's whenever she was obsessed with a design idea. She revealed that the tailor was none other than Madame Z. Salome from Madame Z's workshop, someone who was forced to work by the princess, thus understanding her intentions very well.
Louisa was surprised because she had never heard of this tailor in the capital, and Iloa added that she had only recently become her personal tailor. The two women got along increasingly well, and Iloa smiled brightly, seeing that the fish had started to take the bait. Louisa clearly showed her curiosity and wondered why Iloa had kept such a talented tailor to herself for so long. Iloa smiled and said that if she had known the princess was interested, she would have introduced her earlier, then secretly thought this was the perfect opportunity to help Diana. Louisa crossed her arms, showing a sulky expression at being outdone in fashion, the field she was most confident in. Iloa tactfully offered to introduce Madame Z to Louisa and promised she could make a few outfits for the princess if she wanted. Louisa's eyes lit up like headlights, asking again if Iloa was being truthful about sharing such a good tailor with her. Iloa affirmed that it would be an honor for Madame Z, and she herself would be very excited to see the princess wearing Madame Z's clothes. Louisa smiled triumphantly, thinking to herself that she was about to have another powerful assistant to elevate her aristocratic style. The princess declared that with such an attractive offer, she had no reason to refuse. Iloa breathed a sigh of relief, secretly glad that everything went so easily, and told Louisa to let her know whenever she was free. The fun was interrupted by the appearance of another powerful woman, who was called the second son of the Empire. Duchess Brillius approached with a stern look, formally greeting Princess Louisa and Iloa Clouger. People around started whispering when they saw the host of the party, Duchess Brillius, stepping out in person. Brillius admitted that she did not expect Iloa to attend and personally greet her, quite a strange action compared to before. In fact, the events of the Brillius family were very grand, and usually only those with extremely important matters were granted an audience with her. Iloa secretly thought this must be one of the perks of accompanying the princess, which was why the host favored her so much.
Louisa clearly showed her boredom, saying that since they just met last week, asking about her health sounded a bit cliched. Brillius smiled lightly, suggesting that frequent inquiries wouldn't hurt, and she was very glad to see the princess still healthy. Louisa immediately interrupted her, saying that if she intended to drag her out for a lecture, she should stop right away, because this wasn't class time. It turned out that Duchess Brillius was the one entrusted with the responsibility of teaching etiquette to this princess who had a personality like a bouncing ball.
The Emperor himself had asked Brillius to take over Luisa's education to restrain her explosiveness. Iloa observed and remarked that Brillius looked calm, but definitely had to be a very tough person to handle Luisa. Brillius politely hoped the food suited the guests' tastes, and Iloa quickly praised the baker's skills, which were improving day by day. When Brillius expressed her relief, Iloa suddenly caught a familiar gaze that made her pay closer attention. Duchess Brillius was scrutinizing the princess's posture and appearance extremely closely, exactly like a strict teacher on duty. While the princess was completely unaware, Iloa silently judged that the duchess was a very capable person and would be wonderful if she were a bit less strict. Witnessing that maturity and majesty, Iloa couldn't help but wonder if this woman was really only 14 years old, as rumored. The duchess declared that she would correct everything properly, and then suddenly turned to ask for the princess's opinion. She sternly demanded that the princess must stand up straight and broaden her shoulders immediately to maintain proper royal demeanor. Not stopping there, she also reminded the princess to lower her chin and keep her hands lightly clasped above her navel, in accordance with traditional etiquette. Witnessing this excessively meticulous correction, Iloa could only freeze, because she couldn't understand what kind of farce she was watching. When the duchess praised her for doing well, the princess can only groan in misery, because she was forced into the mold. The princess sulkily reminded her of the promise not to lecture, but the duchess nonchalantly said she was just checking basic posture. Seeing the princess's obedient reflex, Iloa immediately thought of Pavlov's dog experiment because of this unconscious submission.
Suddenly, the Duchess approached Iloa and asked if it was her turn to be questioned about etiquette yet. Iloa hastily greeted her, unable to help but marvel at the other's perfect demeanor, which looked as if it came straight out of a textbook. She tactfully mentioned the importance of the 20th wedding anniversary party of Duchess Brillius and her husband to strike up a conversation. The Duchess thanked Iloa for her tactfulness, but did not forget to apologize for not bringing a gift for this meeting. Iloa affirmed that her presence alone was a great honor, while secretly observing that the woman had a kind face but eyes as sharp as a tiger's. Seeing that the Duchess seemed to want a private conversation, Iloa intended to proactively excuse herself so she could discuss business with the princess. However, the Duchess stopped her and asserted that the person she really wanted to talk to was Iloa. Iloa was shocked and anxious, unable to believe that she had become the target of questioning right here and right now. She awkwardly asked again to make sure if the Duchess was really calling her by name. The overwhelming feeling of anxiety made her feel even more pressured than the time she was scolded by her mother, not knowing what mistake she had accidentally made. The Duchess mentioned hearing some noise in the greenhouse, making Iloa immediately think of the clash with Isabella Howard's group. She honestly admitted that the atmosphere at that time was indeed a bit out of control and noisy. Iloa began to sweat profusely, wondering if she was about to be scolded by the Duchess because of that scandal. She reassured herself that she was the Grand Duchess, and if she showed weakness now, it would be a total loss.
However, she also knew well that no good would come from offending a powerful and difficult-to-deal-with person like Duchess Brillius. The Duchess's gentle yet commanding face made Iloa feel truly intimidated and pressured. Deciding to back down to keep the peace, Iloa spoke up to apologize for letting an unnecessary incident happen at the party. Completely contrary to expectations, the Duchess said that she was the one who had to send an apology to Iloa. She bowed deeply, admitting she had made a huge mistake towards the Grand Duchess right in front of everyone. Iloa froze for a few seconds, completely not understanding what was happening upon receiving such an unexpected apology. The surrounding crowd began whispering in astonishment, seeing the Duchess personally stepping forward to settle the matter. Iloa quickly realized the Duchess was intentionally doing this to squash any disadvantageous rumors about the argument between her and Isabella. Furthermore, the fact that the princess also sided with her made Iloa's position at the party even more solid. As the host, the Duchess was publicly protecting Iloa to block any gossip about the previous conflict. Iloa secretly praised the other party's sharpness and tactfully said that those were just ordinary social greetings. The Duchess was grateful that Iloa didn't make things difficult for her and helped her save face in front of the guests. She looked at Iloa affectionately and commented that she was like a warm spring flower, not cold at all like the public rumor suggested. Even though Iloa endlessly thanked her for her tolerance, the Duchess humbly thought she didn't do anything too grand. Because she was too busy with her role as the host, she had to take her leave but didn't forget to tell Iloa to feel free to call her if she needed help in the future. Iloa was stunned in amazement, unable to believe she had just received such a valuable promise from this powerful woman. She asked again to confirm if she was truly allowed to ask the Duchess for help when encountering difficulties. The Duchess firmly affirmed and asked if there were any problems that needed immediate solving, but Iloa said not at this moment. She expressed her desire to have a deeper conversation on another occasion and received a respectful agreement from the Duchess. Watching the Duchess's back as she left, Iloa believed this was the very person who could help Diana shine brightly in the future. She smiled with satisfaction for achieving such a surprisingly valuable result at today's party. Iloa realized the importance of participating in social events, as it was a golden opportunity to meet prominent figures. Finding it strange, Diana asked what was wrong when she saw the Grand Duchess standing there smiling to herself with a puzzling expression. Despite being scrutinized by Diana for having a somewhat weird expression, Iloa happily denied it and hid the excitement in her heart.
Princess Louisa promised to soon arrange a date to meet again and advised Iloa to feel free to enjoy the rest of the party.
Iloa quietly observed her surroundings with a thoughtful look about what had just happened. She noticed that the atmosphere of the party towards her had completely changed after the recent exchanges. The fact that both the Princess and Duchess Brillis showed their support made Iloa's position extremely favorable. Just as she was about to silently thank Isabella's group for acting as a stepping stone for her, she suddenly saw someone approaching. The two ladies from the Franklin and Eckhart families looked at each other awkwardly, not knowing how to start a conversation with the Grand Duchess. Iloa quickly assessed that these two girls looked gentle and had no intention of provoking her. She took the initiative to flash a bright smile, encouraging them to freely state their reason for calling out to her. One shy lady said that they really just wanted to chat with her for a moment to satisfy their admiration. Iloa happily agreed immediately, because she was currently all alone and had no one to gossip with here. The two girls introduced themselves as Lizzie, the daughter of Count Logan, and someone from the Marquis Eckhart family with faces full of excitement. They expressed their utmost honor in meeting her and endlessly praised her fierce performance earlier. The two ladies marveled that her aura was unique and were very gloating to see Isabella Howard knocked down. Iloa wondered why Isabella Howard was so free that she liked to pick fights with her, even though she gained no benefit. The two girls quickly switched to the topic of fashion, praising her dress as incredibly beautiful and attractive.
They curiously asked if this sparkling dress, looking as if adorned with gemstones, was inspired by roses. Iloa explained that it was actually magic dust on a new design she was trying on, leaving both of them in awe. Lizzie then noticed that the brooch at her waist was also incredibly gorgeous and possessed a strange allure. Iloa proudly boasted that it was an item she handpicked and had specially enchanted to emit an extremely subtle fragrance. The accompanying lady suddenly remembered and confirmed that she had seen the Grand Duke wearing a similar brooch on his cravat earlier. Seeing everyone scrutinizing even the smallest details, Iloa secretly smiled in satisfaction, as her image-polishing plan was a resounding success. The crowd began to swoon over the couple's romance, proving that the previous rumors of a rift were nothing but nonsense. Iloa feigned remorse, saying that because she was so immersed in the sweetness of newlyweds, she rarely appeared in public, causing people to misunderstand. She believed that with just a little trickery like this, Ian's reputation and her own would certainly be significantly improved. Although not very thrilled to have to clean up the mess for a terrible person, she accepted doing it all for Diana's future. She muttered that Ian Clouger was truly a lucky guy to have such a resourceful and smart partner like her. The two ladies excitedly guessed that the scoop about her would definitely take over the Arya newsletter tomorrow. Hearing the name Arya newsletter for the first time, Iloa couldn't help but look bewildered and wondered what it was. They explained that it was an unofficial news sheet, but it updated all the secret affairs of high society extremely quickly every week. Seeing herself seemingly outdated, Iloa told herself it was probably because she had previously been too indifferent to the surrounding gossip. This newsletter was currently the hottest topic in the capital because it gathered the most confidential information without needing official reports. The strangest thing was that no one knew who the real author was or where this paper was printed and distributed. Iloa curiously asked about the author's identity, only to receive rumors full of mystery and enigma. People whispered to each other that the person behind this newsletter must definitely be an extremely highly skilled mage. Iloa sensed that this Arya newsletter really had something very special, not just a simple tabloid. The most unique point was readers could follow other people's reactions to the articles right at the moment of reading. She was utterly amazed, unable to imagine what that direct interaction was actually like.
It turned out that upon subscribing, readers would receive a magical scroll to write comments, which would be displayed publicly right away. Iloa gasped, realizing this was no different from an online comment section in the modern world, and couldn't believe it existed here. After a moment of astonishment, she began to feel extremely excited about this new and powerful discovery. She did not hesitate to ask the two ladies to show her how to order and subscribe to that interesting newsletter immediately. The scene shifted to Ian's office, where his subordinate Kai was reporting that it seemed the Grand Duchess had a very successful party. Kai recounted in detail how she put Lady Howard in her place and received absolute support from the Princess and Duchess Brillis. Ian listened silently with his usual cold expression and only replied with a brief confirmation. Kai added that as requested, he had checked and found that she did not converse for too long with any gentleman at the party. Seeing that Ian seemed to care, despite his constant denials, Kai chuckled and teased whether he needed him to continue playing detective. Ian brushed it off, calling it nonsense, but his hand still tightly gripped the report, featuring a picture of Iloa smiling radiantly. Ian wondered where his subordinate dug up such meticulously detailed information. Kai joked that nothing in the capital could escape his eyes, while also mocking Ian's loyalty to his wife. The young man asserted that he only brought these things up because he found Ian's flustered reaction upon hearing news about his wife very amusing. Feeling bothered, Ian kicked Kai out, claiming he was giving him a headache by talking too much.
Being chased away, Kai muttered to himself as he walked, blaming his boss for being too cold and unreasonable. After Kai left, the office became quiet.
Ian fell into deep thought again, staring at the pile of papers on his desk. He reread the information about Iloa, declaring she wanted to find someone new, but in reality, she only socialized with ladies and noblewomen. Ian frowned, wondering what on earth this woman was scheming in her head to act so contradictorily. He had always been confident in his ability to read people, but Iloa Cloudger was a complete mystery that left him entirely stuck. Ian continued to look deeply into her picture with a thoughtful gaze, seemingly trying to find an answer. He wondered if it was actually him who was wasting time on meaningless things, instead of Kai. It was already getting dark. He stood by the window, remarking that it was supposed to be a light tea party, yet there was still no sign of her. He stood silently alone, watching the night gradually envelop the space outside the mansion. Ian told himself he definitely had to confirm what was actually going on in her head. Just then, he was stunned to see Iloa here in the hall, stumbling and no longer sober. Iloa walked while laughing and babbling to herself, making Ian immediately suspect she had drunk too much. Seeing his wife return late and in such a state, Ian, who was already worried, became even more irritated, assuming she had partied too hard. Iloa felt her head spinning and told herself that perhaps she had drunk too much because she couldn't handle everyone's invitations.
Her legs began to disobey her, and she almost fell over in her high heels. Ian quickly stepped forward to catch her immediately, before she could land painfully. He sternly reminded her to be more careful with her options while in the mansion. Ilo looked up at him with eyes sluggish from drunkenness and mumbled a word of thanks for saving her from a visible loss. She dazedly asked again if the person standing in front of her was really the Grand Duke. Ian remarks that her party looked more like a drinking session than a tea party because the smell of alcohol coming from her was overwhelming. She explained that because everyone preferred drinking alcohol over tea, she also accidentally took a few sips to be polite. Ian sighed in frustration, not expecting Ilo's alcohol tolerance to be so poor and easily get drunk to such a pitiful extent. He worriedly wondered if she was really okay when she started babbling about herself in the third person. Seeing her innocently nod to confirm that she was drunk, Ian was left speechless and didn't know what else to say. Ilo began to complain about how hard she had tried to not lower her guard among a pack of foxes at the party. Ian was surprised because this was the first time he had seen her express her pressures and true thoughts like that. He looked at her with complex eyes, seemingly finding something ridiculous about his wife's sudden honesty. She half laughed, half cried, saying that she had really tried hard not to get drunk, but ultimately failed miserably. Ian wondered why someone who didn't want to get drunk didn't choose the simplest way, refusing to drink in the first place. Realizing that he couldn't get any coherent answers from a drunkard, Ian could only sigh helplessly at this situation. He held out his hand and asked her to take it so he could escort her to her room to rest and sober up. Ilo cheered excitedly when she saw he intended to be her escort at this moment. Ian reluctantly confirmed that he would be her escort as a husband's duty.
Suddenly, Iloa stopped, looking at him with questioning eyes as if she had just discovered something very strange. She stared at Ian and unexpectedly called him madam, making him freeze in astonishment and unable to believe his ears. Ian was completely stunned by this bizarre and entirely confused form of address from his drunken wife. Iloa waved her hand to refuse his help, asserting that this kind of escort was not okay, and she completely rejected it. She firmly demanded him to stop and scolded him for knowing nothing about how to treat a woman properly. Iloa scolded Ian not to try to fool her and advised him to change that attitude before it was too late. Ian, bewildered, asked what exactly she was trying to imply through those harsh and chaotic words. She argued that just holding hands was not enough and blamed him for not knowing what kind of lonely days she had been through. Faced with these unexpected accusations, Ian could only exclaim in shock, not understanding what he had done wrong. Iloa screamed that he didn't understand a damn thing and called him an empty robot who only knew how to follow orders. Ian was stunned at being called an empty shell by his own wife, an insult he never thought he would have to hear.
She also threatened to hit him and sarcastically said that the title of Swordmaster wasn't such a big deal that he had to keep showing it off. Iloa criticized him for being too arrogant about himself and his appearance, while external looks were actually not everything. She confided that she only wanted him to meet a good person and live truly happily, instead of always being so cold. Ian clenched his fists to restrain himself, asked her to stop, and requested to ask her one last question very seriously. Ian looked straight into Iloa's eyes, pressing to see if she really wanted to understand what he was saying. Iloa heartbreakingly replied, wondering if he would ever listen if she told him about the grievances and suffering she had endured alone for so long. She thought to herself that she couldn't confide in anyone, then suddenly grabbed Ian's shirt as if to release the burden in her heart. In her drunken state, she reproached Ian for making her feel lonely and questioned what was actually good about a cold person like him. Ian was stunned by his wife's bitter confessions, sweat starting to bead on his usually calm face. Seeing Iloa suddenly fall silent and rest her head on his chest, Ian awkwardly called her name but received no response. He realized she had fallen dead asleep right after screaming and blaming him, leaving him completely frozen.
Although his mouth complained that she was so troublesome, Ian still gently hugged his dead-drunk wife. Ian suddenly recalled the image of Iloa crying alone in the garden and wondered if she had also been suffering from such loneliness for a long time. He told himself that he was not allowed to be soft-hearted because weakness would lead to suffering, and it was best not to let anyone. He feared that getting entangled in romantic feelings would only end up making both of them unhappy. The next morning, the glaring sunlight crept into the luxurious room, signaling that a new day had begun. Iloa woke up with an exhausted groan as the aftermath of last night's party still lingered. She held her head, complaining because the hangover headache was torturing her fiercely. Iloa tried to remember how she got home after accidentally drinking too much with the noble ladies.
She only remembered trying to stay as sober as possible at the party, but after getting into the carriage, all her memories completely disappeared. She couldn't believe she got dead drunk after drinking a mere 5 glasses of champagne. Iloa was extremely shocked and felt ashamed of her poor alcohol tolerance, which she thought was completely unsuited for herself. Brushing off the fatigue, she reminded herself to quickly get out of bed to start working. Looking up at the clock, she sighed because once again she was late for breakfast. Hearing a knock on the door, Iloa calmly invited the person outside to enter the room. She was quite surprised to see the butler appear instead of the maid Bibi as usual. Iloa curiously asked the butler if there was something important that made him come to find her so early. The butler apologized for the intrusion and said he came to ask if the madam would come down for breakfast today. He further revealed that the Grand Duke himself had instructed him to report that he would wait for her to dine together. Hearing the news that Ian was waiting for her, Iloa couldn't help but be bewildered and her jaw dropped in utter astonishment. She repeatedly asked again to confirm if it was true that the Grand Duke had said so. Looking at the clock that had struck past 10, she felt extremely confused by her husband's strange patience. The butler asked if he needed to report back that she would not be coming down, but Iloa immediately refused and decided to go meet him. As she walked, she muttered to herself, wondering which direction the sun rose from today for Ian to act so weirdly. The dining room scene appeared fully luxurious, with a long table already set for breakfast. As soon as she stepped into the room, Iloa saw Ian leisurely reading the newspaper, and it seemed he was truly waiting for her. Looking at the completely untouched dining table, she realized he hadn't even touched his food, completely different from his previous habit of drinking cold coffee.
Iloa began to worry, wondering if this was a test or some new scheme of Ian's. Ian lowered his newspaper and reminded her that she was late, making her even more flustered. She hurriedly explained that she was very busy and didn't understand why he had to take the trouble to wait like that. Ian didn't reply, but just silently continued reading the newspaper, leaving Iloa with a mess of thoughts. Looking at that cold expression, she secretly affirmed that this was indeed the usual style of the obnoxious Ian. The atmosphere in the dining room became unusually quiet, with only the soft clinking of spoons and forks to be heard. Iloa slurped her soup while breaking out in a cold sweat, feeling the atmosphere was so suffocating it was hard to breathe. She curiously asked the maid about the strange-looking soup placed in front of her. Ian spoke up, explaining that since he knew she had drunk a lot last night, he had instructed the chef to prepare this special hangover soup. Ian's answer shocked Iloa to the point of freezing, her eyes widening as she couldn't believe her ears. Seeing his wife just staring at him blankly, Ian repeated his words, thinking she hadn't heard clearly. He raised an eyebrow and asked if there was a problem with the food, or his sudden concern. Iloa secretly thought that the apocalypse must be coming for a heartless person like Ian to care about others like this. She even doubted whether she was still not fully awake from her hangover and was seeing things. Usually, Ian would finish eating and leave very quickly, but today he lingered extremely patiently. Iloa realized he was deliberately adjusting his eating pace to match hers, making her feel incredibly confused. Sweet desserts were served, but her mind was not on the food at all. Ian opened up that he had been waiting to tell her something important, making Iloa just want him to speak quickly so she could be freed. She maintained a calm facade even though she was trembling inside, politely inviting him to feel free to present it. Ian's first piece of advice was that she should drink more moderately, making Iloa awkwardly admit her mistake. Next, he suggested that from now on, both of them should try to arrange to have breakfast together more often. He even affirmed that he would never leave the table before she arrived, making Iloa choke on her food in utter surprise. She widened her eyes at him, thousands of question marks appearing in her head about this dizzying change.
Ian explained that although he was busy with the territory's work, he would try to make more time for both of them. Iloa agreed on the surface, but her heart was full of doubt, wondering since when he cared so much about being with her. She suddenly stopped when she remembered something important and felt the need to confirm it immediately. Iloa gathered all her courage to ask Ian if anything unusual had happened last night after she came home. Ian silently looked at her with meaningful eyes, making the surrounding space seem to freeze. Seeing her husband say nothing, Iloa became even more panicked and thought she had definitely caused a huge disaster. The prolonged silence made her feel like she was sitting on pins and needles, her heart pounding with fear.
She cursed herself and thought she was really doomed this time if she had accidentally done something outrageous. Finally, Ian calmly replied that nothing had happened, making Aloha breathe a sigh of relief. Even hearing that, she still didn't really believe it and tried to ask again just to be sure. Ian secretly thought this was just a harmless white lie to save his wife's face, while Aloha just wanted to dig a hole and hide out of embarrassment. Returning to her room, she threw herself on the bed to dwell on her humiliation, even though he had denied it. Aloha constantly overthought the crazy things she might have done during her drunken stupor last night.
Right at that moment, Bibi rushed in hurriedly to report that there was a letter from the royal family, causing Iloa to jump in surprise and scream out loud. Bibi quickly covered her eyes and swore that she hadn't seen the madam's currently unseemly appearance. Iloa smiled awkwardly, secretly knowing full well that this little maid had seen absolutely everything. She reassured herself that at least Bibi wouldn't go around reporting this matter everywhere. The letter was sent from Princess Louisa, who was famous for her extremely hot-tempered and hasty personality. Iloa read the contents of the letter attentively with a serious expression, having a premonition about the upcoming troubles. Louisa announced that she had arranged the time and wanted Iloa and Madame Z to come to the palace to meet her immediately tomorrow. Iloa turned to call Bibi to inform her about the princess's sudden invitation to the palace. Bibi was extremely excited, promising to prepare everything thoughtfully for this important trip. Looking at the letter, Iloa secretly sighed that finally, everything had started to unfold exactly according to plan. After that, she curiously asked Bibi if she knew any information about the Arya newsletter that had been booming recently. Bibi excitedly confirmed that she knew it very well, and talked about the news publication that was taking high society by storm. She also revealed that this newspaper had special magic that helped update people's opinions in real time. Iloa realized that this was not a common newspaper, but only for paid subscribers to read. She secretly assessed that this newspaper must be very expensive and only for the rich because of the hot news it brought. Deciding not to stay out of the game, Iloa asked Bibi to tell the butler so she could subscribe immediately. Bibi reminded her that today was the release day of the new issue and hoped they were still in time to receive today's printed copy. Iloa emphasized that she wanted to get today's issue at all costs so as not to miss any news. Bibi wondered because she remembered the madam previously saying she didn't care at all about the nonsensical gossip of this newspaper. The maid recalled the madam's words when the butler was updating the subscription list earlier.
Iloa paused slightly but then admitted with a slightly embarrassed expression that she had indeed said that. She quickly did damage control by saying that human perspectives always change over time. Bibi happily accepted that reason and asked the madam if she really enjoyed yesterday's party. The maid was certain that Iloa definitely became the center of attention at that party. Bibi praised Iloa as the most radiant flower of high society and said there was no reason for her to stay out of social events. Iloa smiled brightly and agreed, stating that the lack of information had caused many inconveniences, so now was the time to change. Seeing the madam's positive change, Bibi was so touched that her eyes welled up with tears of joy. She hurriedly ran off to find the butler to carry out her master's orders, leaving Iloa alone in the room. The moment Bibi turned her back, the smile on Iloa's lips suddenly disappeared, replaced by a highly calculating look. She unexpectedly called out after Bibi to ask one final question that had always been weighing on her mind. Iloa forced a smile and asked Bibi if there was any commotion in the mansion after she returned home last night. Bibi innocently asked back if Iloa wanted to know about how Ian carried her all the way to her room after she got dead drunk and fell asleep. Hearing this, Iloa froze for a few seconds, only able to exclaim in shock because she couldn't believe her ears. Bibi confirmed that Ian did indeed carry her to bed and even told the maids to come in and help her change clothes, making Iloa want to dig a hole and hide as she realized she hadn't managed to drag herself back on her own 2 feet. Still not over the shock, she stammered to ask if there was any other earth-shattering event last night. Iloa's face paled and beads of sweat poured down as she thought of the scenario where other embarrassing secrets were about to be exposed. She tried to appear calm, telling Bibi to just tell everything and promising on her honor that there would be no punishment whatsoever. Bibi continued to pour cold water on her by recounting what she heard from the servants gossiping, that last night Iloa stood in the middle of the hall and gave Ian a severe scolding. Not stopping there, Bibi added that everyone rumored she had made a completely unexpected confession right while being dead drunk. Bibi hurriedly did damage control, saying that actually, the words she said at that time weren't too terrible. The maid reenacted her master's demeanor while complaining about being very lonely and begging Ian to treat her a little better.
Hearing that, Iloa could only cover her face in sheer humiliation, feeling as if the entire world was collapsing beneath her feet. She began to understand why Ian had suggested spending time together. It turned out he had completely misunderstood her original intentions for Diana. Iloa cursed herself, affirming that alcohol was her sworn enemy that had pushed her into this ironic situation. Bibi comforted her, saying that the atmosphere afterward was actually quite fine, and that it was Ian himself who directly carried her back to her room to rest. The maid also added that everyone in the mansion was very sympathetic, knowing she had been working hard lately dealing with too many things. Bibi revealed another shocking piece of news. Ian even skipped breakfast to wait for her to come down and eat together, making Eloa wonder if she was truly going crazy. She began to fall into a psychological crisis, doubting herself and wondering if deep down in her heart she actually had feelings for Ian, which was why she said those words.
Eloa cried heavily in her heart and continuously sent apologies to Diana, fearing that she had completely ruined all the plans made for the girl. Feeling unable to bear it any longer, she told Bibi to step back so she could quietly repent for the mistakes she had caused. Bibi obediently complied and told the madam to call her any time if she needed anything. After taking just a few steps, the maid suddenly stopped as if remembering something important. Bibi turned around to cheer her up, suggesting that couples arguing a bit occasionally would help strengthen their relationship, leaving Eloa completely speechless. The next day, radiant sunlight covered the mansion, beginning a promising new journey. Madame Z appeared with a pale face, sweating profusely due to extreme anxiety over the unexpected invitation. Eloa calmly welcomed Madame Z as if nothing happened, even though the other person was trembling like a leaf. Madame Z stammered, asking why they suddenly had to travel all the way to the capital at this time. Upon learning that the trip would take place exactly today, Madame Z felt truly shocked and caught off guard. Due to the overwhelming pressure, the poor tailor fell to the ground and screamed in despair. Madame Z begged Madame to reconsider, because having an audience with the royal family was too terrifying a matter for a commoner like her. She thought this was a terrible idea, because no commoners would regularly get to meet such nobles. The narration indicated that even the most prestigious tailor shops had never had the opportunity to be personally received by the royals. Madame Z even threatened to break her own legs to escape, but Eloa just smiled and told her to go ahead if she was confident she could handle the princess's wrath. Witnessing Madame Z crying pitifully, Eloa secretly thought that she could completely understand her panicked feelings at this moment. The ferocity and notoriety of Princess Louisa had already spread far and wide, making even the most ordinary citizens terrified. Eloa gently advised Madame Z not to worry too much, because things would not be as bad as she imagined. Despite being comforted, Madame Z still kept groaning and felt like she was stepping into the door of death.
Eloa gave a confident thumbs up, firmly asserting that this matter would definitely not cost anyone their life. The clattering sound of the carriage echoed on the road heading towards the palace, marking an important turning point in the plan. Inside the carriage, seeing that Madame Z was still trembling, Eloa signaled for her to feel free to speak her mind. She suddenly realized that she hadn't clearly explained the reason for the trip and wondered if she was also being swept up by the princess's impulsiveness. Eloa told herself that if she were to tell Madame Z now that the goal was to make the princess smile, she would probably jump out of the carriage immediately. Seeing Madame Z cowering in fear, Eloa could only give a wise smile and hope everything would go smoothly. Finally, the magnificent palace appeared before their eyes, with its brilliant and gorgeous rose garden. Princess Louisa appeared radiantly, enthusiastically calling Eloa's name from afar with a bright smile on her lips. Eloa thought to herself that if Duchess Brulua saw this scene, she would definitely nag endlessly about etiquette. Louisa excitedly welcomed Eloa's presence and expressed her joy at seeing her again so soon. The princess did not hesitate to ask about Eloa's situation over the past few days, with an extremely friendly attitude. Eloa smiled in return, saying she was fine and did not forget to tease back that one day without seeing her felt as long as a whole year. After the polite greetings, Eloa began to introduce the person accompanying her to the princess. Madame Z awkwardly but formally bowed before the princess, who was known as the second son of the empire.
Louisa's purple eyes suddenly shone brightly as she carefully observed the tailor standing in front of her. Louisa confidently asserted that this was definitely Jeremy, leaving Madame Z completely bewildered by the unfamiliar name. Eloa quickly leaned in and whispered a correction, stating that this was none other than Madame Z. The princess realized her mistake and quickly changed her tone to greet the tailor she had been waiting for. Louisa began to squint, scrutinizing Madame Z from head to toe very carefully. After observing for a while, the princess gave a harsh remark that Madame Z looked more ordinary than she had imagined. Louisa happily invited both of them into the palace, thinking that standing out here talking was a waste of time. A series of gorgeous and exquisite dresses were displayed everywhere, sparkling under the lights. The princess's dressing room was so large and magnificent that it was like a real art gallery. Both Eloa and Madame Z had their jaws drop in awe at the terrifying scale of this place. Louisa proudly boasted that this was the most precious treasure she owned. Eloa and Madame Z spared no praise, comparing this place to a paradise for women. Madame Z was so moved that she was speechless, only able to cover her face in utter astonishment. Louisa chuckled with delight, saying that everyone who came here for the first time had the same dumbfounded reaction. Suddenly, the princess firmly announced that from now on, Madame Z would be responsible for making all her clothes. Madame Z was so heavily shocked that she could barely stand before this abrupt and highly pressured request. She turned to subtly blame Eloa for keeping this a secret, while Eloa secretly thought that if she had told her earlier, she would have jumped off the train a long time ago. Louisa raised an eyebrow and asked if Madame Z didn't like working for her, which is why her face looked so blank.
Madame Z hurriedly explained that she was just too surprised because everything happened as fast as a tornado, not that she had any intention of opposing. The princess raised her voice to lecture, saying that life is always full of surprises, and blamed Madame Z for being so old yet not understanding this principle. Iloa grimaced as she witnessed a 14-year-old child blabbering on to lecture someone over 40 about life experience. Madame Z had to bitterly accept the reality and asked the princess what kind of design she wanted. Louisa wanted a few new dresses, but the most important thing must be an extremely special dress for her upcoming birthday party.
Speaking of the royal birthday party, Madame Z once again fell into a state of panic due to the heavy pressure. The princess made a series of contradictory requests, which had to be both simple and magnificent, both quiet and intense, both pure and seductive. Iloa secretly compared this request to ordering a hot frappuccino or an iced Americano, but without ice and coffee. She began to worry about Madame Z's fate when having to face the sky-high demands of this eccentric princess. Surprisingly, Madame Z turned out to be extremely excited and praised those ideas as excellent, making Iloa realize that she was not normal at all either. Madame Z immediately set to work, and the flowing creative ideas made her completely forget all her initial fears. Iloa silently sighed in admiration when witnessing the combination of these two passionate and enthusiastic lunatics. The afternoon tea party took place in a luxurious atmosphere, with exquisite pastries and premium tea meticulously arranged. Iloa finally understood the magical resonance power when two somewhat abnormal souls met and understood each other. Louisa admitted that this was her best time ever, while Iloa felt that being a normal person standing between these two was truly exhausting. The princess was curious about where Iloa had dug up a precious gem like Madame Z, and received a witty answer that she had snatched her right from Louisa's own hands. Iloa expressed her joy that the princess was satisfied with her choice, while also recounting how worried Madame Z was when entering the palace.
Louisa asked in surprise if there was anything in this capital so scary that it made people worry so much. Iloa smiled and said it was simply because Madame Z was too nervous at the prospect of meeting a powerful princess like her in person. Louisa's slender hands gently lifted the teacup, displaying an extremely aristocratic and elegant demeanor. The princess leisurely took a sip of tea, enjoying the delicious flavor in a rare peaceful moment. Louisa still seemed jealous and asked once again if Iloa really didn't want to yield this talented tailor to her. Iloa stood her ground, tactfully declining the princess's offer with a highly professional social smile. Louisa laughed and said she was just joking, as she knew Iloa had quickly chosen first, so there was nothing else she could do. The princess seemed a bit sulky seeing Iloa being so polite, but it was clear she deeply respected her friend's decision. Suddenly, Louisa changed the subject and wanted to ask Iloa for help with another important matter. She revealed that she intended to prepare a special gift for the royal family members. Iloa was slightly taken aback, not expecting someone as haughty as the princess to think about giving gifts to others. Louisa asked in return if there was anything Iloa desired, as she was very willing to return the favor after receiving such enthusiastic help. The phrase, "return the favor," echoed in Iloa's mind, opening up a golden opportunity she had been waiting for so long. Iloa gave a meaningful smile, secretly triumphant knowing for sure that Louisa had completely fallen into the trap she had painstakingly set. Princess Louisa earnestly hoped Iloa would not refuse her kindness. She pleaded that she truly wanted to do this for the Grand Duchess. Louisa thought that as a princess, she couldn't just keep receiving from Iloa without an appropriate return. She earnestly asked if there was anything she could help with, because she didn't always have the chance to lend a hand like this. Iloa smiled with calculation and came up with an idea to test the princess. She suggested they make a verbal agreement that in the future, Louisa would have to fulfill any single request for her. The princess excitedly asked if it was some sort of wish ticket. Iloa nodded, confirming that was exactly what she was implying through this proposal. Louisa found this game incredibly interesting, and her purple eyes lit up with excitement. She was thrilled, feeling like a fairy getting ready to grant miracles to others. Iloa secretly thought Louisa sometimes still retained her childish traits appropriate for a 14-year-old, but the important thing was that everything was going exactly according to plan. She intended to save this wish ticket until a year later, the time when Diana would return. Even though Diana would graduate from the academy with excellent results, her prolonged absence would cause her status in high society to waver.
Iloa believed that if the princess wore clothes made by Diana, it would create a craze, helping Diana establish her star status immediately. Although in the original story the princess didn't like Diana at all, Iloa believed she could change the situation so that she could peacefully divorce Ian later. While deeply engrossed in her perfect plan, Iloa was caught red-handed by Louisa with a sly smile on her face and was asked what she was plotting. She quickly covered her embarrassment by saying that everyone said her smile looked a bit weird, making the princess feel truly confused. Louisa happily accepted and promised to always wait to fulfill that request, while thanking Iloa for her subtlety. The princess whistled cheerfully, feeling that she did not suffer any disadvantage in this exchange. Suddenly, Louisa clapped her hands, signaling that she wanted to ask Iloa another delicate matter. Iloa maintained a calm demeanor and politely invited the princess to feel free to ask. With eyes sparkling with curiosity, Louisa asked directly about what was going on between Iloa and her brother, the Grand Duke.
She instinctively smiled, suddenly thinking that her expression right now must be exactly like the curious look she had in middle school when she bravely asked her teacher about their first love. Iloa pretended not to understand, but the princess immediately saw through her and told her to stop acting in front of her. Louisa asserted that the two were suddenly suspiciously close, and she wouldn't be easily fooled. Iloa realized she could deceive the world, but it was very hard to lie to family members like the princess or Ian. She explained that a marital relationship inherently always has its ups and downs, and going from bad to good is a normal thing. Louisa criticized that reason as too bland, while Iloa said that later, when the princess gets married, she would naturally understand. Not receiving the dramatic answer as expected, the princess sulked because she found it no fun at all. Iloa smiled and said this topic should be discussed later, while Louisa wanted to spend more private time with her.
The princess remarked that the couple always wore the exact same expression and only knew how to say yes or no in a mechanical way. Louisa frankly admitted that she used to dislike Iloa, but had now completely changed her mind. She publicly declared that she now really liked the Grand Duchess, making Iloa only smile and thank her. Iloa secretly hoped that in the future, the princess would like Diana even more than her because she was only here under a one-year contract. The conversation was interrupted when a servant reported that Duchess Brillos had arrived to start the etiquette class. Louisa regretted having to stop the chat and promised to see Iloa again soon. Before leaving, the princess also suggested that Iloa take a walk around the palace to admire the blooming hydrangeas. She winked goodbye, while Iloa secretly thought that Duchess Brillos would surely have a hard time teaching Louisa. The scenery of the imperial palace appeared poetic, with gardens full of vibrant flowers. Iloa marveled at the beauty of the royal garden and found it truly more magnificent than the garden at her mansion. She was secretly thinking that this extravagance was only natural when she suddenly slipped on her high heels.
Iloa panicked and cried out when she realized she was losing her balance and about to take a rather unpleasant fall. Suddenly, an elegant gentleman appeared just in time to catch her and gently asked if she was hurt anywhere. Iloa awkwardly confirmed that she was fine, though she was still a bit shaken from the incident. The young man apologized for touching her so abruptly, while she secretly rejoiced that thanks to him she hadn't broken any bones. She told herself that she really didn't want to be bedridden in a cast in a world where medicine was still quite limited. Iloa carefully observed the other person and realized he was too handsome to be just a fading supporting character. The man introduced himself as Duke Hayden Roger, a name that immediately made Iloa associated with important plot points. This was an extremely powerful family and a solid pillar of support for the current Empress's faction. Hayden Roger was the Empress's childhood friend and had inherited the title at a very young age. He frequently helped the Empress escape difficult situations, and Iloa had to apologize for not recognizing him immediately. Hayden politely replied that this was the first time they had met at such a close distance, so she didn't need to feel guilty. Iloa curiously asked if he had recognized her identity from the very first moment. He asserted, how could he not recognize someone as famous as the Grand Duchess? She secretly wondered how far her reputation had spread that everyone knew it so well. Hayden thought that, if they had met at Brillius's party yesterday, things would have had a more ideal start. He explained that he couldn't attend that party because some urgent matters had come up. However, he affirmed that if he had known the Grand Duchess was present, he would have found a way to change his schedule to be there. Iloa was stunned by his sweetness and secretly wished that Ian could be even half as good as this man. Diana would have been much happier.
He seemed quite surprised to see that the Grand Duke was not escorting her today. The female lead brightly explained that she entered the palace because she was personally summoned by the princess. The guy thought to himself that the princess's name in this place was nothing short of a universal pass. Knowing that the Grand Duke wasn't accompanying her, he started approaching the female lead with a meaningful gaze. He offered to walk her to the carriage because the cobblestone path was bumpy, worrying that she would have difficulty walking alone in high heels. He even carefully reminded her that wearing these shoes and walking on small stones without paying attention would make it very easy to trip. The female lead happily accepted his help, while the guy attentively reminded her to be careful with every step. The two exchanged affectionate social gestures as he proved to be incredibly gallant. Upon arriving at the carriage, he expressed that escorting her was a great honor for him. He did not spare his praises, calling her the flower of high society whom not everyone had the opportunity to be beside. The female lead felt that these words were a bit over the top and secretly thought that Ian still had much to learn from him. He continued to assert that he was simply a lucky man to have this opportunity. A light kiss on her hand was performed to bid her farewell in accordance with polite etiquette. This action made the female lead start to wonder if he was intentionally flirting with her. Night fell, and it was also time for her to return to her mansion. Ian was already waiting in the hall and subtly scolded her for returning later than he had expected.
Seeing Ian's expression, she merely reminded him that it was time for him to go have dinner. The two fell into an awkward silence, with neither saying another word. The female lead started to get annoyed because Ian didn't know to ask her back after she had initiated the conversation. She considered it basic politeness to return the question. She bluntly interrogated Ian whether he intended to ask if she had eaten dinner yet. The Duke repeated mechanically, asking if she had eaten dinner yet. The girl reported that she and the princess had accidentally eaten too many sweets and skipped the main meal. Upon hearing this, he indifferently replied that he knew. Ian's nonchalant attitude made her feel like he didn't care about her at all, and she began to make comparisons in her heart. She called Ian back and said she had some thoughts she wanted to share. She bluntly affirmed that a standard and caring man is the absolute best. This implied remark left Ian dumbfounded because he completely didn't understand what was going on. She sighed in disappointment, telling Ian to try harder because it seemed she had expected too much from an ignorant person like him. Before walking away, she even sighed and lamented that this was truly the ironic destiny of her life. She continued into the house, where the maid was waiting. Bibi ran over to ask if her mistress's trip was fun. Mentioning the fun part, she gave a dark smile that terrified Bibi. Bibi fearfully covered her mouth, thinking she had accidentally misspoken. She reassured Bibi that she was just joking, and that the trip was quite interesting, even though it made her feel a bit overwhelmed. Bibi curiously asked if there was anything special about her first time being personally invited to the Imperial Palace. She dreamily admitted that meeting Duke Roger was quite fine, because to her, handsome boys are always the best. She told Bibi to go prepare bathwater so she could rest. Bibi suddenly remembered and boasted that she had ordered the Arya newsletter that she had mentioned before, and the butler had just brought the latest issue. A scroll-type newsletter and a brush were already prepared. Bibi showed her the official newsletter she had just received. Bibi explained that the mechanism was very simple. Just write comments on the attached paper, and the words will appear directly on the newsletter for everyone to see. She was amazed by the magic of this seemingly ordinary paper. Seeing Bibi hesitate, she immediately asked if something was wrong. Bibi confessed that she accidentally saw news about the Grand Duchess right on the front page when checking the newsletter. The title, The Duke's Phantom Rebellion, along with the content about the princess's party, made her admit that the headline was indeed very fierce.
She realized that no matter what world she was in, people always used sensational headlines to attract attention. The feeling was all too familiar. The female lead began to focus on carefully reading the detailed comments below. The comment section underneath was as lively as an online forum, with all sorts of rumors about the Grand Duke kissing his wife's hand in front of everyone. She didn't expect public opinion to shift so quickly, nor did she expect the article to receive much more attention than she thought. Bibi anxiously asked if she felt hurt by those scrutinizing words. She affirmed that she was fine, and reminded Bibi to bring her the newsletter as soon as the new issue was released every week. Afterward, she told Bibi to step back and prepare her bathwater as instructed. Alone in the room, she looked at the newsletter thoughtfully. She suddenly came up with the idea of stirring things up a bit to add more drama.
Her target this time was Ian, the man who was currently the center of gossip. The rustling sound of a quill pen echoed as she began to write meaningful lines on the magical scroll. She smiled triumphantly, convinced that this move of hers would be extremely effective. The next morning at the dining table, Ian greeted her with a completely dull question about the weather as usual. She secretly thought that since the weather was actually beautiful today, she would overlook his lack of creativity. A luxurious breakfast was already laid out on the table. She ate while trying to remember where she had left off reading the newsletter yesterday. Ian kept staring at her without taking his eyes off, making the atmosphere weird. Being stared at for too long, she started to feel restless, indirectly asked Ian if something was wrong. Ian questioned exactly what she was watching so attentively. She sneered, thinking Ian wanted to pick a fight with her, and explained she was just reading the newsletter. Ian looked surprised and repeated the word newsletter with a confused expression. She explained that this was a news sheet specializing in high society news, and she had started subscribing yesterday out of curiosity. Ian asked if this issue was just published yesterday, and she confirmed that was correct. The guy seemed unable to believe that she would care about such nonsensical gossip. She replied that normally she wouldn't, but right now she found it very interesting. She began to mention that she had personally heard a lot of rumors directly. She sarcastically asked Ian if he felt guilty, because if he were human, he would certainly feel remorse. She showed Ian the front page and commented that this latest article was not badly written. Ian remarked that she seemed to be really enjoying that content, and she did not hesitate to admit that was true. He just calmly replied that it was good, then continued eating as if nothing happened. She was dumbfounded, unable to believe that Ian could only say such a short and heartless sentence. Ian asked in return what else she wanted him to say, while she thought he would be much more curious. He asserted that he didn't care about the gossip of others. She smacked her lips and said it was a pity, because lately she was very interested in them,
and that also explained why Ian was in his current situation. The clinking of spoons and forks echoed in the quiet space after the dialogue. Taking this opportunity, she asked Ian to go somewhere with her on the weekend. A new chapter begins with a bustling street scene.
Sitting in the carriage, Ian brought up the fact that she once claimed not to care about what others thought. The female lead confirmed that she did indeed say that. Ian simply replied with the word great, short and concise. When the two stepped down to the street, the people around started whispering in amazement at seeing the Grand Duke and his wife appear together. Everyone was buzzing, and some even affirmed that the rumors in the newsletter were true, since they saw them shopping together with their own eyes. She proudly enjoyed the feeling of being a celebrity, as all eyes were drawn to her. Ian asked if she had a specific destination in mind, but she said there really wasn't anywhere special. Her true intention was just to appear with Ian in front of the crowd to draw attention and teach him how to escort a lady in public. She observed Ian and realized that based on his recent actions, he seemed to have absorbed the lesson faster than she thought. The fact that Ian was willing to tag along without a single complaint was already a massive step forward. Looking at Ian's appearance, she secretly admitted that no matter how troublesome his personality was, he still carried the aura of a true male lead. She suggested they take a stroll around, since it had been a while since she went out on the streets, so everything felt fresh to her. She declared that normally the male lead would take the lead, but today she would take charge of this date, and told him to just follow her. Ian froze immediately upon hearing the word date coming out of her mouth.
He brought up the fact that she had once said there were no romantic feelings between them, yet now she was using that word so naturally. Seeing Ian's reaction, she changed her tone, suggesting they just treat it as a light-hearted family outing. Ian let out an exasperated sigh, ultimately agreeing to call it a date just to get it over with, because he found it too troublesome. She smiled and clarified that this was merely a practice date, assuring him not to worry since she would never ask him out on a real date anyway. Ian looked at her with eyes full of suspicion, pressing her on whether she was truly planning to do that. She immediately denied it, arguing that they were strictly in a cooperative relationship, so that would never happen, but then suddenly paused due to a strange premonition. Ian pointed toward a well-situated shop, praising the building for its beautiful architecture. She agreed right away, remarking that since the place was in a bustling area, its high value was a given. Thinking about future prospects, she excitedly declared that opening a shoe store there would be absolutely perfect. A flashback occurred, recalling how Diana would later open her shoe store right in this very building after struggling to start her business in a deserted, narrow alley.
She silently cursed Ian for being so useless back then, not helping Diana even once. But in the end, the female lead still shone brightly. After many hardships, Diana also achieved brilliant success and managed to move her shop to the main street. She still remembered vividly the detail that Diana had personally renovated this entire building to hang her own signboard. Seeing her constantly gazing at it, Ian asked if she was genuinely interested in doing business. She flatly denied it, saying she was just looking around and had no other intentions. Ian added a blunt remark that she didn't have any talent for business at all, making her choke with anger. She forced a smile, but inwardly cursed him for being arrogant just because he monopolized the empire's businesses, telling herself that Diana would shatter his ego later. Ian suddenly noticed her footsteps. It seemed the ornament on her shoe had become loose at some point. The two continued walking, and she told herself the purpose of this trip was to show off to everyone that she and Ian were together. Ian told her to move closer and pretend like they were reading a book together. She was a bit shy, subtly reminding him that people around them were staring. She thought the current distance was still not enough, and even asked him to put his hand on her waist. He asked why they had to go that far, but she calmly said that normal couples all act like that. Seeing another couple pass by, she immediately handed her things to her husband to hold, thinking they weren't very heavy. Ian looked at the pile of bags in his hands and wondered why she didn't leave these to the servants. She sulked, affirming that she herself wanted him to be the one to carry those things directly. She explained that the gentleman style was trending, and no one hated having someone else carry their things. She told him to stop complaining and just hold them, leaving Ian with no choice but to silently comply. Arriving at the accessory shop, she hesitated between two umbrellas and asked him which one suited her better. Ian ruthlessly commented that they both looked exactly the same, then advised her to just buy whatever she wanted to make it quick. The Grand Duke calmly told his wife to just spend her own money to buy whatever she wanted quickly. That statement made her irritably ask if he understood what the meaning of a gift was. The sky began to turn into a beautiful sunset color as the two left the shops. She felt smug because her plan to go out and show off a bit was a complete success.
But then she also had to admit that she couldn't resist the allure of excessive shopping. Meanwhile, a decorative piece on her shoe had fallen off without its owner knowing. She noticed that her brooch had suddenly come loose.
Ian sarcastically remarked that this practice date seemed to be making her enjoy it a bit too much. He added that she looked as if she were treating this rehearsal as if it were real. She immediately shot back, saying she wasn't Diana, so he shouldn't expect a real date. Despite saying that, she still smiled brightly, admitting that she had a lot of fun, and urged him to head back. Ian said nothing, only silently watching her silhouette with a thoughtful gaze. Suddenly, he looked down at her feet and suggested stopping by one more place before heading back. She asked in bewilderment where they were going, considering he had been trailing behind her like he was being led by the nose all this time, but now suddenly changed. Ian held out his hand courteously, silently waiting for her to take it. Under the purplish afternoon sky, he led her toward a building ahead. When they stopped in front of a shoe store, she wondered in surprise why they had come here and whether he had seen the drop decoration. Ian asked her back why she liked asking questions to which she already knew the answers. She startled, panicking over whether he had the ability to read her mind. The doorbell rang, signaling a customer as both stepped inside the shop. The shop owner, in the middle of their work, panicked upon seeing Ian's sudden appearance.
The shoemaker frantically greeted the two nobles with a face full of anxiety. Seeing him trembling as he asked the purpose of their visit, she felt as if she and Ian were monsters trying to scare people. Ian coldly replied that coming to a shoe store, what else could they do besides buying shoes? His sharp answer made the atmosphere in the store fall completely silent and full of pressure. She had to speak up to defuse the situation, saying that they just wanted to look around a bit so he shouldn't worry too much. She skillfully took Ian's hand, reminding him of his promise to go looking at things with her. Ian suddenly became awkward and flustered at her unexpectedly intimate gesture. She was smug because she handled the situation so smoothly, then turned to ask him if she did well. She urged the store owner to just go back to work and let them browse freely. Ian told her to sit down so he could personally pick out a suitable pair of shoes for her. She was utterly surprised, unable to believe her ears when she heard him say he wanted to choose something for her. He repeated what she had taught him, that when picking a gift, one must think of the receiver first. She silently marveled, not expecting him to apply her lesson so quickly. Finally, she smiled and agreed, letting him have full control over deciding this gift. Ian brought out two very exquisite pairs of shoes, making her gasp in awe at his taste. She praised his good eye, but Ian calmly replied that he already knew that well. She pouted, secretly scolding him for being an expert at ruining romantic atmospheres. Ian held out the shoes and asked her to try them on in order. He attentively observed her, patiently waiting for a reaction from the person opposite him. She suddenly flashed a meaningful smile while looking at the shoes in his hand. She coquettishly demanded that Ian personally put the shoes on her feet. Ian was dumbfounded, unable to believe she would make such a bold request. She gave him a light glare, telling him he still hadn't fully understood the meaning of the lesson. If he had brought her here, he had to go all the way.
She giggled, adding that usually one even has to get down on one knee to put shoes on a lady. To everyone's astonishment, Ian actually bent down to fulfill her request. He picked up the canary yellow shoes and gently asked if she liked this pair. While Ian was meticulously putting on her shoes, she kept staring intently at him without looking away. She suddenly asked if he knew the true meaning of gifting shoes to someone else. She explained that giving shoes is a wish for that person to be able to go to good places. Hearing that, Ian's hand suddenly paused. He seemed stunned for a moment. He repeated the phrase "good places" with a thoughtful and solemn expression. She smiled brightly and continued, saying it could be a good job, a warm home, or simply meeting the right person. A simple blessing but containing so much of the giver's heart for the receiver. Ian confessed that this was the first time he had heard such a profound meaning from a gift. She excitedly shared that where she used to live, there was a belief that a good pair of shoes would guide their owner to new horizons.
Ian was slightly suspicious and asked again if she hadn't grown up in the capital, making her startle as she realized she had just misspoken. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that he didn't press further about her background. Ian suddenly asked if she planned to wear these shoes to some nice place without him. The unexpected question made her freeze, not knowing how to answer properly. Seeing her remain silent, Ian had to repeat the question once more because she hadn't heard clearly earlier. He seriously pressed again about her intention to go to that nice place. She was confused, wondering why he was suddenly so interested in this matter at this moment. In her heart, she secretly thought she originally planned to leave her title to find her own happiness when Diana returned, but she knew full well that this was definitely not the answer Ian was expecting. She felt extremely embarrassed as he kept holding her ankle while looking up at her with an inquiring gaze. Finally, she stammered a denial, saying she had no intention of going anywhere far. She shyly asked Ian to let go of her foot, because this action was truly too ambiguous. Ian remained silent and didn't reply, his eyes still glued to her as if wanting to see right through her soul. Finally, he let go, telling her it was done and she could stand up now. She felt a sense of disappointment, wondering why he would ask such an important question only to end it so abruptly.
The two left the shoe store together amidst the respectful greetings of the staff. Iloa suddenly realized that Ian Claude had always maintained such a cold and unpredictable personality. Ian's face suddenly relaxed with a smile full of relief. When he saw Iloa wondering about his expression, he simply explained that the carriage was already waiting nearby. The irrelevant answer left Iloa looking bewildered, completely unable to understand what he was implying. After returning to his office, Ian began to take off his outer coat after a long day. He thrust his hand into his pocket, searching for something with a thoughtful look. Ian was truly stunned when he found a purple gemstone hairpin, wondering how long it had been lying there.
He sat down at his desk, but his eyes could not leave the small object shining in his hand. Looking at the item, he recalled how for the past 2 years, Iloa had always been extremely polished and meticulous about her appearance. The contradiction in her actions made Ian feel truly confused and baffled. In his mind, the moment suddenly flashed back when Iloa blushed and asked him to let go of her ankle. The study door suddenly opened with a familiar sound. Kai walked in and frantically asked questions when he caught a strange expression never seen before on Ian's face. He couldn't believe his eyes and rushed over to interrogate whether Ian had just smiled. Immediately, Ian flipped his expression back to his usual sternness and asked Kai in return what was going on. Kai felt disappointed because his boss's speed of switching to serious mode was too fast. Seeing Ian holding something, Kai curiously asked what the object in his hand was. Ian covered it up by saying it was nothing, but his hesitant expression made Kai even more suspicious. Kai continued to tease, demanding to use magic to check, because he thought the cursed stone was what made Ian smile, causing him to snap because the guy talked too much.
Kai was startled into silence by Ian's harsh attitude. Nevertheless, he still expressed his concern because Ian had been acting extremely unusually lately. He even compared Ian to a girl deeply in love, only to receive a look full of coldness in return. Ian looked disgusted and demanded that Kai stop that nonsense immediately. Kai justified that Ian only said that when he disliked the topic of conversation, then moved on to report on the territory situation. Ian sighed tiredly, put his hand to his forehead, and asked if this was the entire report for this quarter. Kai assured him that everything was fine, the weather was favorable, and the people were living very well. Hearing the positive report, Ian finally felt reassured and nodded in satisfaction. Kai mentioned that he had also sent a similar report to the Imperial Palace on his way here. After that, he announced important news that the Emperor intended to summon both of them soon. Ian froze upon hearing about the princess's birthday party and the fact that the Emperor had many things to ask them. He realized that the rumors following their trip to the Brillis mansion had reached the royal family's ears. Ian sighed wearily, having a premonition of upcoming headaches and troubles, but still acknowledged the information. He instructed Kai to finish the pile of paperwork by the weekend, and then allowed him to leave. Kai walked away, but hesitated slightly, stopping at the door. He turned around and asked if he could say one last thing. Ian sarcastically asked, since when someone like him had to ask for permission to open his mouth. Kai suggested that he should just be honest with himself. After all, the two of them looked really good together lately.
Kai quickly called Ian's name and slipped away before he could get angry, seeing his expression start to turn scary again. Ian held his head in exasperation at his subordinates' increasing audacity and mischievousness. He stared at the gemstone in his hand again, pondering the true meaning behind Kai's words. The memory of Iloa coquettishly asking him to help her put on accessories suddenly appeared vividly in his mind. He then remembered her blushing, shy face at the shoe store. Ian realized he was still very much moved by those moments. He smiled softly to himself and admitted that the recent outing was really not bad at all. At the mansion, the atmosphere began to bustle when the latest daily newsletter arrived. The maid excitedly brought the newspaper directly to Iloa as fast as possible. She was even looking forward to more hot news about the lady and the duke this week. Iloa chuckled to herself, understanding that other people's romances are always the most entertaining topic to gossip about. She began to flip through the newspaper to see what was interesting today. The paper reported on a persistent gemstone war between two families, making Iloa sigh at the greed of the rich. She saw that public opinion was not on Count Olsen's side, but felt this name sounded very familiar. Iloa decided to brush it aside, thinking that if she couldn't remember, it probably wasn't an important character. She continued turning the pages to look for articles about herself and Ian. Finally, she found the extremely sensational headline, "The Ghost of the Duchy or Cinderella." Iloa smiled triumphantly, seeing that everything was going exactly according to her desired plan. She read the netizens' jealous comments about their relationship. Many people were eagerly looking forward to seeing them with their own eyes at the upcoming banquet. She realized the recent trip to the shoe store had also attracted a massive amount of attention.
Suddenly, Ian's dashing image appeared in her mind again. Iloa startled, her face flushing red from the unexpected thoughts about him. She crumpled the newspaper, wondering why that scene had suddenly popped into her head at this moment. Iloa came down for her meal on time and found it strange that Ian was already sitting there waiting. She greeted him good morning and asked how he slept with a very warm attitude. In response, she still received Ian's stiff, robot-like expression, making her inwardly sigh. Iloa suggested he should try changing his way of greeting to be more natural and varied. Ian replied mechanically that if she wanted to hear something specific, she should just tell him. She completely gave up, thinking that he truly was a dry Iron Man who needed fixing. Breakfast took place in a luxurious but extremely silent atmosphere. While eating, Iloa noticed the maids making very strange gestures. One maid even excitedly winked at her with a meaningful look. Iloa felt embarrassed and stiffened, certain that everyone had read that article. Seeing everyone winking at her, she worried whether Ian had noticed this anomaly. But glancing over, she saw him still calmly reading the newspaper, maintaining his composure as always. Iloa wondered why she felt so restless and sensitive today. Gathering all her courage, she mentioned that today's newsletter had another article about the two of them. He asked about the newsletter she had just mentioned with a calm expression. Iloa confirmed it was news about their outing and thought to herself that this Iron Man probably wouldn't care anyway. Ian suddenly paused for a beat, appearing to be thinking about something. He unexpectedly asked what exactly the contents of that article said. Iloa was stunned, not believing her ears, and immediately asked back if he really wanted to know. Ian tilted his head to confirm and asked if his interest in it was a big deal. Iloa inwardly screamed because a person who usually didn't care about worldly affairs like him was now asking about silly rumors. Ian concluded by declaring that perhaps he should also read it a bit, just to know. Iloa just stood frozen, hugging the newspaper with a face full of astonishment. Ian Cloudher had suddenly changed his personality. He said he would read the newsletter simply because she had just mentioned it. She was utterly shocked, unable to believe that a cold guy like him would care about gossip. She even wondered if someone had put poison in his food today. Ian asked her back, "Didn't you say yourself that you liked it?"
He just kept staring at her with eyes full of hidden meaning, making the atmosphere awkward. She awkwardly explained that the high society rumors in it were quite interesting, so there was no harm in reading it, but in her heart, she still wondered why he was looking at her so closely today. Ian mentioned that he heard this newspaper was published anonymously, and she confirmed that it was true, that no one knew the real gender or identity of the author. Based on the amount of detailed information about the nobility, he concluded that the author must definitely be someone of a not low status. He continued to ask about the frequency of publication and whether she really intended to follow it regularly. Seeing her looking shocked, Ian tilted his head and wondered if there was a problem with him wanting to learn about it, while she secretly thought about where a busy person like him would find the time for such things. She explained that it was a weekly newspaper. Each issue had about 15 articles and often included serialized news sections.
Ian made a blunt statement that he would tell the butler to subscribe to the newspaper long-term right away. After she left, she found everything so confusing as Ian suddenly acted differently overnight. She used to think that knocking some sense into Ian Cloudher would be interesting, but this sudden change made her more flustered than ever. She wondered how he would react when reading the public's live comments about himself on the real-time newsletter. But then she reassured herself that maybe this was a positive sign. With the sharpness of high society, those articles might help him see things more clearly upon seeing the criticisms about a husband's callousness. She let out an exhausted sigh after overthinking her boss's change. She decided to put everything aside to return to the pile of work waiting in the office. To be honest, upon seeing the massive workload on the desk, she had thought of running away to be free from the burden. But because Diana's future was tied to the Cloudher mansion, she knew she couldn't be selfish, since the little girl would be the one suffering if she left. Her pride as a noble lady did not allow her to back down from difficulties, so she immediately got to work. Fortunately, she found old notebooks lying neatly in the drawer. These things were no different from an extremely detailed job handover guide for newcomers that even she could easily understand. She secretly wondered why her old version had prepared these things so meticulously. She shook her head to dismiss the wild guesses, assuming it was simply for some practical reason rather than seeing through the future. Anyway, they helped her a lot, and right at that moment she heard Bibi knocking on the door. She told Bibi to come in and asked what the matter was, then saw the girl peeking her head in hesitantly. Bibi handed her a manuscript picked up on the bedroom floor while cleaning. Instead of putting it on the shelf, the girl thought she should bring it to her right away. She told Bibi to hand it over and thanked the girl for her thoughtfulness. Bibi quickly said goodbye and dashed off to continue her work, leaving her with the stack of documents in hand. She intended to write something for the next issue, but then hesitated, not knowing if she should speak up at this time. She looked at the mountain-high pile of documents next to her with a weary face, feeling she needed some motivation. She told herself that as long as she finished the day's work, reading the newspaper for a bit of entertainment wouldn't hurt. It was absolutely not slacking off. She started scrolling through the comments section, which was always the most dramatic part of the newspaper, to see what the public was gossiping about. Her eyes stopped at an article about the war over the gemstone mine located between the territories of Mary and Olsen.
Everyone is buzzing about Countess Olsen acting strangely, easily losing her temper and locking herself in her gloomy mansion since her husband's death. She felt the name of the Olsen family sounded strangely familiar, and she began to search through her memories. She remembered that this was the wife of the late Count Olsen, a famous figure in the mining industry, and she would soon become incredibly rich in the next 3 years. In the original work, she was the very first person to refuse negotiations with Diana when the girl wanted to find gemstones to make shoes. She put her hand to her forehead, finally remembering why she found this woman so familiar. From what she knew, the Olsen family needed to win the battle for ownership of the shared quarry against the Mary family. The Countess definitely had a hidden reason to adamantly refuse to give up that quarry at any cost. However, at this rate, she would lose everything to her opponent. In the original story, she had to give up. A meaningful smile appeared on her lips when she found a perfect opportunity to change Diana's fate. She firmly asserted that she would not let things play out according to the old script, but would intervene. She went to the Olsen family's mansion and couldn't help but sigh at the dreary, desolate atmosphere of this place. The butler led her inside, and the attitude of the servants made her shudder, feeling as if she were stepping into a haunted house. She thought to herself how unbelievable it was that in just 3 years, this place would become magnificent thanks to the massive fortune Madame Olsen was about to acquire. The living room door opened with a creak, revealing the silhouette of a woman sitting alone by the window. She greeted her and thanked her for agreeing to receive her, even though she arrived unannounced.
The Countess looked at her coldly and bluntly asked her true purpose for taking the time to come all the way here. Looking at her face, she clearly saw the extreme exhaustion and helplessness surrounding this woman since the day her husband died. She got straight to the point, saying that she came here after reading the information in the Arya newsletter. Hearing that, the Countess immediately changed her attitude, demanding that she leave right away because she thought she was just like the other greedy people. She hurriedly stopped her, affirming that she did not come to put pressure, but genuinely wanted to help her. She revealed the secret that she knew she kept the quarry not out of greed, but to protect the ancient Toria tree on the hilltop where the quarry began. Her eyes saw through her soul, asserting that she was trying to protect it at all costs. Seeing her stunned reaction, she knew she had completely grasped the situation. The Countess froze, as if she had been hit in her weak spot, and tremblingly asked how a stranger like her could know that. She smiled wryly, glossing over that she knew through a very complex source, and hoped she would not press further. The Countess still maintained a tough attitude, declaring that no matter what she knew, she would never give up the quarry. She explained that she was misunderstanding her good intentions, and she had no intention of asking her to surrender. The pitiful woman confusedly asked what exactly she wanted from a desperate person like her. She confidently promised that she would do everything to ensure the quarry still belonged to the Olsen family. She asked if she truly thought that just by stubbornly holding her ground, she could protect the land. The Countess thought that no one could do anything if she just firmly refused to step back under the Marquise's pressure. She sighed inwardly, concluding that this woman's stubbornness had reached an unmatched level, on par with a bull.
She was known for being rigid and would never open her mouth to anyone unless they had earned her absolute trust. It was exactly this difficult personality that caused her to be constantly misunderstood and isolated by high society at parties. She bluntly said that staying silent and enduring it alone only made her look truly irrational in the eyes of the public. She warns that if this continued, she would undoubtedly lose the stone mine completely to her opponent, no matter how much longer she tried to hold on. The Countess, stunned, asked what she had just said with a look of complete disbelief. She repeated her firm assertion that she was definitely about to lose that stone mine. Madame Olsen asked in return whether she was being too naive or having delusions about reality when saying those words. She analyzed that the Mary family's intention was very clear. They wanted to exploit the mine at any cost while she was taking no specific action. She pointed out that from an outsider's perspective, she was just being unreasonably stubborn without any justifiable reason. She asked if she truly believed she could win this battle just by clenching her fists. Unless she was a fool, she had to clearly see that she was in big trouble.
The Countess burst into tears, admitting that she had no plans for mining, nor did she want to do profit-driven business like the Mary family. She thought to herself that at least the lady had revealed her true feelings, even if it was just the beginning. She smiled softly, seeing that the fish had taken the bait and everything was heading in the direction she had mapped out. She asserted that whether the lady realized it or not, she actually had a knack for business, and her assets would soon skyrocket in the next 3 years. The Countess asked in bewilderment what the hell she was talking about, with a face full of question marks. She asked the lady what, in her personal opinion, was the most lucrative type of business nowadays. After hearing her answer that it was mining, she immediately denied it and affirmed that it was emotions. She advised her to tell the public the love story of her and her late husband so they would understand the reason she wanted to stop the mining. The Countess initially brushed it off, stating she had no free time to expose her personal matters for the world to laugh at. She countered that silence at this moment would only make her seem unreasonable, and she needed to win people's hearts to protect that tree.
The Countess remained skeptical, asking whether her private story carried enough weight to stop the Mary family's ambition. She flashed a radiant, confident smile and replied with a question full of hidden meaning. She affirmed that people are always very vulnerable to a story that touches their emotions. The Countess was completely stunned by the firm attitude and confidence of the young woman in front of her. She asked her why people have been so engrossed in unrealistic novels or romantic love stories for centuries. The simple answer is that people always love stories with depth and empathy.
The Countess was worried because she had been absent from high society for too long, and her current reputation was not very good either. She secretly praised her for being very sensible and knowing her own limits better than she initially thought. She asserted that she did not want to waste effort on unsuccessful endeavors and was holding a much more effective way to help her. She asked if she had ever heard of the power of posters. That is the tool people often use to express opinions and shape public opinion in the fastest way. Utilizing her past life experience participating in social media fandoms, she knew well that the public actually cared little for dry facts, but was only swept up in emotionally sensational things. In reality, humanity is inherently only attracted to stimulating and highly provocative elements. Human nature is like that, the Duchess smirked cryptically, making the servant beside her panic at her strange expression. She nonchalantly asked about the personnel situation, how many people had left that mansion over the past year. According to calculations, having 80% of the old staff leave is enough for news to leak without anyone being able to trace the culprit. Madame Hayes stared blankly, confessing she could not understand the deep hidden meanings the Duchess was muttering. She excitedly revealed that the former servants themselves would be the authors of the upcoming posters. If a person with a bad reputation vindicates themselves, it is seen as desperate, but through the words of others, it becomes objective truth. Seeing the other party still hesitating over right and wrong, she asked bluntly if Hayes really had the right to worry so far ahead at this moment. The deep blue eyes of the miserable lady flickered with trembling, accompanied by a tense clenched fist.
She urgently confirmed whether this action would truly bring the mining operations to a halt. Receiving a firm assurance, the Duchess smiled contentedly, as the prey had completely fallen into the trap. She casually remarked that the Emperor was inherently very good at listening to the voices of his people. The story goes back 20 years, when Felix and Harries were still green-haired children. To escape her mother's nagging, she accidentally wandered to the Torreya tree, which Felix had already claimed as his secret base. Neither of the two children gave in. One tried to chase the other away, while the other resolutely held her ground without taking a step back. Their childish turf war ended with a dramatic, sulky turning of backs from both sides. Even though they constantly bickered like cats and dogs, they maintained the habit of meeting under that tree once a week. That strange friendship quietly blossomed for 10 long years without changing. Tragedy struck when her father forced her to marry a wealthy merchant to save their failing family. Refusing to accept a fate shackled by money, she chose to run away from the arranged marriage. The 20-year-old girl, lost and alone in the world, eventually returned to the Tree of Memories when the sun had completely set. She sat there sobbing until late at night, until Felix appeared like a saving destiny. The young man, panting, called her name, proving an anxious and hurried search through the night. In her most vulnerable moment, their hands intertwined tightly like a silent vow of connection. Felix didn't use many flowery words. He simply offered a direct marriage proposal to free her from all familial chains.
Thanks to his persuasion, they had enjoyed 10 years of sweet cohabitation by the tree filled with memories. Hayes humbly thought her life story was nothing special, making the Duchess exclaim in astonishment. She couldn't believe how such a tear-jerking epic romance could be kept secret for so long. The madam honestly replied that she didn't feel the need to tell it, thinking no one would care about her story. The Duchess's fierce denial startled Hayes, leaving her bewildered and unsure of what she did wrong. The intuition of a true bookworm told her that this would definitely be a best-selling novel. A tight handhold showed the deep empathy between two female souls in similar situations. She firmly asserted that no one could remain indifferent after hearing this moving story. Despite her gratitude, Hayes couldn't hide her doubt whether that would be enough to turn the tide. The Duchess told the other party to just sit back and watch the show, leaving everything from A to Z for her to handle. Timing was key. She planned to blanket the central square with posters right after tomorrow. While pondering about hiring a group to post the news, she suddenly paused when she saw Hayes about to ask a question. The madam curiously asked why she was so enthusiastically helping when this matter had nothing to do with her. She calmly replied that this was just an investment, leaving the other party even more confused and baffled. Helping each other out in passing was normal. She only asked for a small favor after everything was settled. Deep down, she was chuckling to herself because she knew for sure this mine would be a gold pit in the next 3 years.
Putting aside future matters, she urged hearers to be ready to protect her invaluable memories. With high determination, the lady firmly confirmed her readiness for the upcoming battle. The panoramic view of the magnificent manor appeared as a witness to a grand plan that was gradually being executed. The decisive footsteps of the Duchess echoed down the hallway, displaying absolute confidence.
Ian unexpectedly caught her passing by with a thoughtful expression as she had just returned to the mansion. He was surprised that she had returned earlier than expected after leaving at the crack of dawn to handle some business. Ian's invitation to a weekend dinner made her freeze because she suddenly remembered what day it was today. She hurriedly declined, giving the excuse that she had to go find the poster pasting group with a mischievous look on her face. Without waiting for her husband's reaction, she turned away, leaving Ian bewildered with a promise to meet another time. He watched his wife's back, unable to help but feel left out by that sudden coldness. Early the next morning, the rushed knocking on the door dispelled the peaceful atmosphere of the manor. The maid Bibi excitedly told the breaking news about the mine dispute between the two families. The whole city was bustling around the anonymous poster from a loyal former person. The Duchess smiled slightly in satisfaction because all the chess pieces were moving exactly as she had planned. When asked if she knew about this, she feigned innocence and flatly denied any involvement to keep it a secret. Bibi was extremely shocked to see that even her mistress knew nothing about this shocking event. She ordered her outfit to be prepared to head into the city center, aiming to witness the results with her own eyes. The main hall of the mansion appeared, where Ian was waiting with a not-so-happy expression. He caught her trying to skip breakfast to go somewhere, making her startle and turn around with an awkward smile. She made the excuse that she was busy because the whole city was in an uproar, so she couldn't just sit still at this moment.
Ian frowned, reminding her that she had been busy all weekend and still refused to rest. She hurriedly offered to make it up to him with lunch, intending to quickly slip out of her husband's sight. A warning knell rang in her head when she noticed Ian's unusual attitude this morning. He casually announced that he would escort her to the street, making her freeze at this unexpected enthusiasm. She wondered inwardly if he had eaten something wrong to change his temperament like that. Ian explained that because he missed their appointment over the weekend, he now wanted to spend time with his wife to fulfill his duty. She could only stammer her agreement, while he turned his back to prepare with a leisurely demeanor. Ian's echoing footsteps seemed to assert his dominance in this reluctant stroll. She wondered whether this was the result of a good upbringing or just a clumsy act. The bustling street scene was filled with people eagerly discussing the newly emerged scandal. The plan to hang out privately with Bibi vanished into thin air, and she had to accept the reality of walking hand in hand with Ian. Ian looked at the crowd, wondering if all this chaos originated merely from a piece of wallpaper. She irritably asked in return how he could remain so indifferent to such a tear-jerking love story. He calmly replied that he had fulfilled his duty of mourning the late Count long ago. She passionately explained the romantic beauty of a woman who devoted her heart to protecting old memories. Ian narrowed his eyes at her, repeating the word romantic with a tone full of skepticism and scrutiny. He sarcastically remarked that she usually preferred humility, but was now passionate about cheesy romance. She sighed in frustration, thinking that a dry person like him could never understand the hearts of the majority. Instead of standing there judging, she advised him to try finding some romance to save this marriage. She added another lesson about loyalty and told him he should treat Diana well. Ian stood silently, watching her silhouette, his eyes showing flashes of deeply unpredictable contemplation. A few days later, exactly as predicted, the Emperor withdrew his old order and sided with the Olsen family. Hayes endlessly expressed her gratitude, admitting that she didn't know how to adequately repay her. She modestly returned the courtesy, stating that just a cup of tea was nothing compared to the other's merits. Seeing that Hayes had started hiring workers again, she felt reassured because everything was gradually stabilizing. She congratulated the madam because now the stone mine and the commemorative tree were completely preserved.
A relieved smile bloomed on Hayes's lips, signaling that a peaceful new chapter was about to begin. After the greetings, she shifted to the main issue regarding the previously agreed-upon favor. She reassured her that her request was nothing major and wouldn't make things difficult for the other party. She requested that all the minerals from the Olsen region be sold exclusively to her family at half price. Surprised, Hayes repeated the request, probably not expecting the required price to be so economical. Receiving a nod of confirmation, she secretly thought she was thoroughly preparing for the next 3 years of her future. These rare minerals would be premium materials for Diana's shoe business. The prospect of Diana striking it rich while she leisurely enjoyed her alimony made her extremely excited. Just imagining it, the Duchess couldn't hide her eager and ambitious expression. She suggested that Hayes should take advantage of her rising reputation to make a stronger comeback in high society. Building her position while public opinion was supportive was an extremely smart move that she recommended. Hayes was nodding and considering it when suddenly the butler whispered a highly urgent message.
She panicked upon hearing that he had arrived earlier than expected, even though the appointment was originally scheduled for the evening. Seeing an unexpected guest arrive, Iloa intended to politely take her leave, but Countess Olsen hurriedly apologized for the abruptness. Olsen explained that it was her cousin, who was as close to her as a biological brother. It seemed he didn't know she had an appointment with the Duchess, which was why he barged in like that.
Since the two siblings hadn't seen each other for a long time, Olsen offered to introduce this younger brother to Iloa before she left. Olsen also added that this younger brother had mentioned meeting Iloa once, making her slightly puzzled but still aptly agreeing to greet him. Suddenly, a handsome young man appeared from the bushes and greeted them upon seeing the two. As soon as she clearly saw the other person's face, Iloa was startled to realize it was an acquaintance. The young man approached, bowed respectfully, and expressed his honor at meeting the Duchess again. It turned out that Olsen's cousin was Duke Roger, whom Iloa never expected to have family ties here. Roger apologized for the lack of etiquette and explained that he had rushed over immediately upon hearing that Iloa was at the Countess's mansion. Iloa was briefly flustered, wondering if it was true that this Duke had traveled all this way just for her. Roger enthusiastically explained that he wanted to personally express his gratitude because she had helped the Olsen family like a household member. Observing the two, Iloa noticed they both had very unusual eye colors, but their faces didn't look much alike, which explained why she hadn't recognized their relationship before.
Iloa asked Olsen if she had told her story to the Duke, causing Olsen to explain somewhat awkwardly. Roger laughed and told her not to misunderstand. It was just that he kept asking because he wanted to thank the person who had kindly helped his family. Iloa smiled brightly to reassure her that she had no intention of blaming the Countess at all. Roger added that because the siblings were very close, they often confided in each other about everything, and he had also mentioned accidentally running into Iloa at the palace. Hearing that, Iloa smiled and congratulated Olsen for having such a reliable relative to lean on. Suddenly, Roger revealed that he had taken care of everything by bribing a former servant to take responsibility for posting the notice, helping Iloa avoid any trouble. Hearing this, Iloa breathed a sigh of relief and secretly admired this guy's quick resourcefulness. She did not hesitate to praise the Olsen family for being truly reliable, which gave Roger a chance to feel proud. Riding the wave of success, Roger invited Iloa to have a meal sometime if she didn't mind. Iloa widened her eyes in surprise, asking again to make sure if Duke Roger was really inviting her out to eat. The guy earnestly hoped she would agree so he could have a chance to repay her, even though Iloa secretly thought that her help came with conditions and wasn't for free. Seeing Roger persistently persuading her, Iloa had to surrender to his overwhelmingly formidable weapon of beauty.
When it was time to leave, Iloa said goodbye so the two brothers could talk, but Roger insisted on escorting her all the way to the carriage. This excessive enthusiasm made her a bit awkward, wondering why he had to go to such lengths. Roger tactfully said that he had taken up too much of her time and wanted to do this to make up for it, while Olsen just stood there smiling. The guy even used a killer gaze to ask if his desire to escort her a bit was selfish, making Iloa secretly cry out to the heavens because using his good looks like this was basically cheating. On the way to the carriage, Roger remarked that today's distance seemed much shorter because last time they only drank tea near the garden. He continued to sweet-talk her by saying how lucky he was to escort her for a second time, leaving Iloa doubting his flattery skills. Roger smiled meaningfully, saying that things were not entirely just social pleasantries as she thought. He whispered that he had truly been looking forward to seeing her again, making the atmosphere suddenly flutter with emotion. Iloa was bewildered, wondering if the person he was looking forward to seeing again was really her. Roger repeated what she once said, that if fate allowed, they would meet again, making Iloa feel like this line sounded a lot like flirting. She reminded herself that she was a married woman, so this was probably just social courtesy, though she secretly guessed this guy must have broken countless hearts. The two said their goodbyes. Roger wished her a safe trip back, and Iloa also wished him a good time with the Countess. As she disappeared from sight, Roger watched her with deep eyes, secretly hoping the chance to meet again would come soon. Shifting the scene back home, Iloa was startled to see Ian waiting right on the stairs. She realized that lately the two of them kept running into each other frequently in a strange way. Iloa found it absurd because Ian's office was nowhere near her bedroom, so how could they keep meeting like this? She paused for a moment to ponder this bizarre coincidence.
A thought suddenly flashed through her mind, making her panic and wonder if Ian was actually standing here waiting for her. But then she quickly brushed it off, blaming herself for being delusional, because how could that emotionless robot ever know how to wait for anyone? Ian asked how her trip was, and Iloa replied that it finished earlier than expected, making him fall slightly silent. Seeing that Ian had been busy all weekend lately, Iloa intended to bring up the studies that had been delayed for so long. Ian looked at her with an unpredictable gaze, secretly thinking that perhaps putting off the lessons for several consecutive weeks was a bit much. She thought to herself that perhaps delaying the lessons for several weeks was too much. Just as Iloa was about to schedule it for next week, Ian immediately interrupted, saying that it was not feasible. He announced that there was an invitation from the palace, addressed directly to the married couple. The unexpected news made Iloa freeze, her face going blank because she didn't understand what was happening. Sitting in her room, she was still stunned by the sudden invitation from the royal family. Looking at the seal on the letter, she realized it came directly from the Empress, the head of the empire. Iloa began to search her memory to see what kind of person this Empress was in the original work. According to the novel, the Empress was a perfect, wise leader who always put her people first and was extremely majestic. Even though Ian could be a threat to the throne, she always treated him like a real family member.
She also deeply doted on her youngest sister, who was over 20 years younger than her. In particular, her affection for the prince consort was incredibly close, the exact standard of an ideal leader. However, Aloa scratched her head in frustration because she couldn't remember the Empress having any connection with the character Aloa in the original story. Usually, she only summoned Ian and had never officially invited his wife, making Aloa worry if this was another trap. Wasting no time, she called Bibi to urgently find Madame Z to prepare an outfit for the audience.
Eloa told herself she needed to prepare very carefully, even though she still felt uncertain about this trip in her heart. Finally, the weekend arrived, and Eloa prepared to appear gorgeously to enter the palace. Ian appeared in a luxurious outfit, radiating a demeanor that made people look up in awe. Eloa couldn't help but marvel at her husband's handsomeness and praised that his new hairstyle suited him very well. She smiled radiantly upon receiving a compliment in return from Ian. Ian blushed slightly, admitting that today's dress also looked very good on her. Eloa excitedly recounted that Madame Z had specially taken care of this dress as soon as she knew she would be seeing the Empress. Ian politely offered his hand, and Eloa smiled and took it to begin their journey together. The luxurious carriage of Grand Duke Ian Clouger arrived at the palace amidst anticipation. Ian considerately held his wife's hand as they stepped out of the carriage. The two looked like a perfect match. A middle-aged man came out to welcome them, expressing his honor to meet the couple. Eloa happily greeted him back, while Ian remained silent and somewhat cold. Seeing Ian's expression, Eloa secretly wondered why he was showing such an unapproachable attitude upon arriving here. The man eagerly reassured them and was about to address him as Your Highness, but quickly corrected it to Duke, proving that they knew each other from before. Ian's ignorance left Eloa speechless. She couldn't understand her husband's strange reaction. The person invited them to follow him to meet the Empress, who was already waiting, and Eloa whispered to Ian that she would settle the score with him once they got home. A loud noise rang out, as if signaling the royal presence at the palace. The palace appeared incredibly magnificent and grand, leaving Eloa overwhelmed and amazed. Seeing his wife staring blankly with her mouth open, Ian gently reminded her not to stare so excessively. The guide suddenly made a remark that the two of them seemed to be overly affectionate lately. Eloa asked back shyly, while he nodded and said that with his experienced eyes, this was a beautiful sight. He also added that at first he didn't believe the rumors of their passionate relationship, but seeing it with his own eyes, he finally believed it was true. Eloa felt something was wrong. The atmosphere suddenly became indescribably strange. She was about to speak up because it was abnormal for a servant to interfere in the master's affairs like this, but Ian coldly said that it was enough. He called the man Empress, leaving Eloa completely dumbfounded and confused. A glow of magic surrounded the person, and they smugly said that they had acted very well, praising their younger brother for having sharp eyes.
Beneath the disguise, Empress Alicia revealed her beautiful true self, playfully scolding Ian for not playing along with her a little. She was none other than the 17th leader of the Levant Empire, the mighty Empress Alicia Carlotta Helios Levant. She laughed while criticizing Ian for always being as stiff and unchanging as a block of wood. Ian asked her to maintain the proper demeanor of a monarch, but the Empress just laughed it off, saying she was still quite young. She even philosophized that no matter a woman's age, her soul remains that of a young girl, and a little mischievousness wouldn't diminish her majesty. The Empress approached Ian, teasingly asking when he would fix that attitude of his, though she admitted he looked somewhat cute. Eloa was completely shocked to hear the word cute used for Ian Clouger, a combination she had never dared to imagine. The Empress explained that since it was the first time her younger brother and sister-in-law had come to the Sun Palace, she couldn't just sit still and wait. She chuckled, hoping Ian wouldn't scold her too much, as she had only asked the courtmaids to help pull a small prank. While the Empress found this prank highly entertaining, Ian could only put on a thoroughly fed-up, serious expression. Eloa wondered if this was truly the majestic Empress she had read about in the novel. In the original work, she always appeared as a steadfast ally to Ian and a wise ruler.
There was not a single line mentioning that she had such a childish and playful personality, leaving Eloa completely speechless. Ian casually said that he was already used to the Empress's mischievous pranks, but he noticed that Eloa seemed genuinely shocked by what had just happened. Indeed, caught off guard, Eloa looked dumbfounded and could not utter a word because she was so stunned. In the solemn atmosphere, a respectful greeting was offered to welcome the mighty Empress Alicia Carlotte Helios Levant. The Empress cheerfully told Eloa got to be so formal and to raise her head, even though Eloa secretly thought to herself that they were not that close anyway. Seeing her sister-in-law looking intimidated, the Empress quickly apologized for her persistent prank earlier that had startled her. Eloa hastily said it was fine, but Ian angrily criticized that the prank was truly too much. A silence enveloped the room as Ian kept glaring at the Empress with the most serious expression imaginable.
The Empress laughed heartily, seeing that the rumors of the couple being close were true, and Ian even knew how to defend his wife, making Eloa unsure whether to be happy or sad.
She showed extreme curiosity, not understanding what on earth had made Ian change his temper so quickly in such a short time. Seeing Ian about to retort, the Empress quickly waved her hand and said that was enough, lest the young man get furious and leave halfway. She decided to call a truce and invited both of them to lunch because Prince Consort Riley was already waiting in the dining room. Everyone respectfully greeted Prince Consort Riley with his noble title upon entering the banquet hall. Riley welcomed them very warmly, not forgetting to ask about their trip and immediately guessing that the Empress had just been playing a mischievous prank again. Iloa could only force a smile and say it was fine, even though she secretly scolded in her heart that if he already knew, why didn't he stop his wife from the beginning? The Empress thanked the two of them for coming to the meal, while Iloa tactfully replied that it was a great honor to be personally invited. The Empress shared that since Ian moved out, she was also hesitant to invite him back, to which Ian immediately added a sarcastic remark that she was absolutely right to do so. Witnessing that scene, Iloa secretly thought that her husband's rude nature really spared no one, not even the Empress. The Empress complained that Ian drew boundaries too carefully, having nothing of the adorableness of a younger brother, but he affirmed that those days were long gone. Finally, everyone sat down at the banquet table, and the Empress generously invited the couple to feel free to enjoy the meal. The scene of the royal dining room appeared extremely grand and luxurious, with a sumptuous feast. During the meal, Riley brought up the fact that he heard the princess praise Iloa endlessly, because the two of them had been very close lately.
Iloa confirmed they had met at the seasonal party of the Brillis family and had started becoming close since then. The prince consort smiled and said the girl kept mentioning her all the time, proving she really liked her, which made Iloa feel very grateful. The Empress suddenly asked to make sure if the two of them had actually interacted with each other before. She honestly replied that they had only briefly met once at a wedding and a few other dry social events. Iloa recalled the time she introduced her personal tailor to the princess and was glad that her help made the princess happy. The Empress breathed a sigh of relief because her daughter didn't throw a tantrum, while Iloa explained that she eagerly shared because the princess complimented her dress. She found it very strange because the princess was inherently unapproachable, but this was the first time she truly admired someone like that. Because of this, on the occasion of the princess's birthday, the Empress invited Ian and his wife to go on a vacation in the south for a week. This sudden invitation shocked Iloa to the point where she could only utter a bewildered yes. She further explained that because Madame Brillis was busy, and she and the prince consort also had to go, but were tied up with state affairs. Therefore, the Empress earnestly wanted to rely on Iloa to go along to look after and play with the princess. Iloa started to sense that something was wrong, having a premonition that this was not simply a normal request. The Empress smiled mysteriously, confirming that inviting both of them to participate was no different from an official royal event. Iloa immediately realized the Empress's true goal was waiting for Ian's nod, not hers. She silently sighed that the cheerful atmosphere up to now had vanished into thin air after that calculating proposal. Ian immediately politely refused, saying there was no shortage of other noblewomen who could accompany the princess, so why did it have to be his wife? He only agreed to let his wife go for 3 days, because he was still busy with work in the capital, making the Empress criticize him for being too cold to let his wife travel far alone. She also added that there were rumors they were deeply in love, so what would people think if he let his wife go traveling alone? The Empress suddenly turned to ask Iloa for her opinion, making her startle as she was pushed into a dilemma between the two of them. Ian tried to justify that he was no longer a member of the royal family, so participating in this trip would displease other nobles. Immediately, the Empress sternly reminded him that even if he was a Grand Duke, he was still a part of the royal family. Feeling the heavy pressure from his older sister, Ian could only clench his fist to control his emotions. She reassured him not to worry needlessly, because the princess was really looking forward to seeing his wife again on this trip. Left with no other choice, Ian had to give a vague answer that they would reconsider this proposal later. The Empress smiled with satisfaction and hoped to soon receive a favorable answer from the two of them.
Iloa thought to herself that settling this matter smoothly certainly wouldn't be easy at all. The royal lunch finally ended in an atmosphere full of silence. Ian suddenly stood up to excuse himself immediately, making Iloa panic at her husband's decisiveness. The Empress agreed to let him go back to work, but unexpectedly kept Iloa behind for a private chat, making her extremely anxious. Iloa answered tremblingly when her name was called, feeling like she was about to face a tough situation. She smiled brightly, wanting to confide in her sister-in-law, leaving Iloa to only wonder why she had become a hostage once again. The Empress said that it had been a long time since the two sister-in-laws had a proper conversation since the wedding, so now was the right time. She was deeply shocked to hear the word sister-in-law come out of the Empress's mouth, as she thought the two were never inherently close. Prince Consort Riley was also very observant, inviting Ian for tea to give the two women some private space, making Iloa secretly praise their perfect coordination. Before leaving, Ian looked at his wife with a worried gaze and told her that he would be back to pick her up soon. Starting the private conversation, the Empress apologized if the joke earlier made Iloa uncomfortable. She just wanted to tease her younger brother. Iloa smiled on Diane's thigh, but deep down she knew full well that this older sister was a master who knew exactly what she was doing.
She quickly said it was nothing, while the Empress chuckled and praised her cute sister-in-law, who was much more adorable than she had imagined. She began to open up, saying that ever since Ian left the palace, he had become quite cold, and if she didn't tease him, he would treat her like a stranger. The Empress sadly complained that Ian always just called her by the dry title of Empress instead of showing sisterly affection. Iloa suddenly realized that the reason the Empress liked seeing Ian get mad was that the two of them actually had quite similar personalities. The story went back to the past, when the former Empress and the Prince Consort were mortal enemies. Because of that, Ian was considered a thorn in the side of the current Empress's faction, whether he wanted it or not. The former husband even stood outside and provoked Ian. At that time, Alicia was only 12 years old, while Ian was only 4. The Empress recounted that it was hard when they were young, and now that they had grown up, the distance was even greater. She hoped the title of Grand Duke would help somewhat, but in the end, their family affection remained distant and full of caution. Hearing those sincere confidences, Iloa could only silently look at the Empress with eyes full of sympathy. History recorded that although the rumors of animosity had lessened, the Empress's faction was always trying to find a way to remove Ian from the line of succession. On the contrary, greedy nobles strongly supported Ian to use him as a stepping stone to restrain the power of the royal palace. The more the Empress showed her affection for Ian, the more she was criticized by her own faction, and the princess was also implicated. She understood that this trip might make Iloa uncomfortable, but she quickly reassured her that she was very grateful for the invitation. The Empress praised Iloa for not only being beautiful, but also having a very tactful and beautiful way of speaking, just like the person she is.
She asked her to use her words to persuade Ian because she believed that deep down, this guy was someone with an extremely soft heart. Iloa could only force a smile, thinking that the Empress had definitely misjudged that ice-cold guy. The Empress sniffled and said that despite his appearance, he was as soft as pudding inside, making her constantly worried. Iloa secretly thought that considering Ian as pudding was truly hopeless, but politely promised to try her best. The Empress thanked her and urged her to leave quickly, lest Ian wait too long and show a scowling face to her. She also carefully warned her not to tell Ian about this, because he was inherently very sensitive. The door opened, signaling that the secret conversation between the two women had ended in drama. Iloa stepped out and immediately met Ian's eyes, who had been waiting for her for who knows how long with a face full of worry. The Empress placed her trust in Iloa, hoping she would be the one to replace her in continuing to care for and keep an eye on the rigid Ian. The clattering sound of the carriage leaving the palace ended a day full of surprises and pressure at the royal palace.
Sitting in the carriage, Iloa kept brooding, feeling that everything was going in a very wrong direction compared to her plan. She had never intended to win the favor and absolute trust of the Empress to this extent. Iloa also wondered why the head of an empire like the Empress would read the high society's trashy aria gossip newsletters. Seeing his wife muttering to herself, Ian spoke up, telling her not to worry and just let things pass. He asked if the conversation was fun and was suddenly reminded by Iloa about their previous cooperation agreement. She reiterated the condition that if her reputation didn't improve after a year, she would divorce him. Hearing about the divorce, Ian's face suddenly darkened, clearly showing his displeasure and a bit of anger. Seeing that attitude, Iloa found it strange, wondering if this guy had completely forgotten his previous promise. Ian asked back that if everything was fine after a year, they wouldn't need to divorce, right? Which forced her to reaffirm that she would still divorce him. He remarked that she was acting as if she was planning to divorce her husband exactly 1 year from now, making the atmosphere tense. Iloa hurriedly denied it, but in her heart, she was scolding him for being an emotionless robot, not understanding human feelings at all. She carefully calculated that when Diana returned in over a year, if she still hadn't divorced, things would be very bad. Ian reminded her that this marriage was arranged by the Empress herself, so it wasn't as simple as wanting to leave and just leaving. He added that the Empress seemed to favor her a lot recently thanks to the princess, so the divorce would be even more difficult. Moreover, according to imperial law, if nobles wanted to divorce, they had to have the final approval of the Empress for it to be officially effective. Iloa began to worry, afraid that she would become an obstacle for Diana, the true female lead of this world. But then she smiled confidently, secretly thinking that if Ian was willing to help, asking the Empress for permission wouldn't be impossible. But he quickly poured cold water on her. Ian argued that whoever really wanted to go their separate ways must be the one to step up and convince the Empress to approve that request. Witnessing her husband's difficult attitude and cold face, Iloa could only clench her hands, trembling with anger, and secretly scolding this male lead for being an undeniably hateful jerk.